Revenge Hunter is Book 3 in Zoey's Revenge. Written by Maggie Shaw. Published by Google Play. Copyright owned by Harley Romance Publishing 2023. Chapter 1. Every man on the planet can tell when a woman is pretending to be asleep, except Finn apparently. I kept my chin tucked to the side against the ugly blue gingham of my hospital gown. He couldn't see all of my face, just my cheekbones and the blood-crusted hair around my head. His breathing echoed around me, and I didn't dare move as he stared at me. I didn't know why he was hanging around me, and I didn't care. Considering the way he practically ran over me to get out of the helicopter earlier, he'd made it clear where I stood in the hierarchy now. Fuck him. I kept my face relaxed, but what I really wanted to do was clench my jaw and throw a punch. Even a verbal one might make me feel better right now. The sound of his fingers tapping on a tablet probably meant he was checking my medical charts. Or rather, the notes one of the nurses had scrawled while another one stuck an IV into my arm. If I were awake, I would slap that tablet out of his hand for violating my privacy. I clenched my fists tight and hoped he didn't see them beneath the soft blanket they'd thrown over me. Talking to him right now might result in a lot of things being said that shouldn't be spoken aloud. I risked a peek out from under my lashes. He stood a few feet away, his honey brown hair gathered in a hasty knot at the nape of his neck. His brows were pushed down under his furrowed forehead, and the urge to smooth it flat again with my fingers overwhelmed me. Fucking hormones. Obviously. My body hadn't learned what my brain already knew: he didn't want me. The second I could physically leave this house, his palace, I would be hightailing it back to my apartment so I could start my own hunt for the Black Mage. A sniffle coming from his direction caused me to freeze up. I kept my gaze low until I could manage a quick scan of his face. Big fat tears glistened along his stupidly devastating cheekbones. Some tiny part of me melted at the display of emotion. Another part hardened to it. I wasn't going to forgive him over a few well-timed tears. He came around to the side of the bed I was facing. I schooled my sleeping face and relaxed my clenched eyelids. A shuffling sound told me he threw himself into the chair on that side. Shit. If he was staying, I might have to go to sleep for real. Another sniffle and my tough exterior cracked. Damn him. I wouldn't feel sympathy right now. He didn't deserve it. He didn't deserve me. Fear spiked through me. Maybe the captain hadn't made it through the bullet he'd taken to the face. Maybe that was why Finn was sitting at my bedside blubbering. A pang in my chest followed. The captain and I had only just started easing toward being on the same page. It would be a while yet for his overbearing tendencies to wear down for me, but I'd felt a connection when we'd gone to save Finn. No. If he'd died, someone would have woken me, told me. You're not fucking asleep, Zoey. The captain had to be fine. He was no doubt already bossing his men around from his immaculately hospital-cornered bed. I wouldn't put it past him to get back to his old self fast, even without most of his face. I almost let myself giggle on that and then sobered up. The pain meds were making me a bit loopy. It would explain the soft feelings blooming inside me at the sight and sounds of Finn crying. Hormones and pain meds, every badass woman's kryptonite. The monitor by my bedside beeped, and even though they'd sponged me down, I still smelled pine needles with every inhale. It had to be wafting from Finn. The scent made my gut churn until nausea threatened to overtake me. If I puked, Finn would know I was fake sleeping. Not an option, because then we would have to talk. I know you'll be all right, Finn said. I stilled, fearing he'd caught me. When something rustled beside me, I risked another peek from slit eyelids. He doubled over, his head cupped in his hands, his nails digging into the back of his head. Zoey, so help me, if you die on me, I'll raise the earth until I kill Esteban. I promise you that. His words cut into me, hammering away at the resolve I'd barely started building against him. What kind of woman could keep her shit together when a man sat there crying, professing unyielding vengeance over her death? Not this one. I shifted and opened my eyes to look at him fully. His gaze locked with mine, the heat there zipping through me until he shuttered his expression to something more reserved. I'm not going to die, you idiot. It's just a flesh wound, I whispered. He didn't even blink at my joke. The silence stretched as we stared at each other. Are you going to say something, or are we going to sit here awkwardly? I asked. With a huff, he shoved out of the chair. With his back to me, he swiped at his face, removing all traces of moisture before turning back. How are you feeling? Like someone tried to dissect me while I was still alive. Not even a smile at that one. Maybe drugged up Zoey thinks she's funnier than she actually is. How is he? Finn shifted and then gripped the bar of the gurney. He's fine. The doctor stabilized him and I healed him the best I could. He'll be brand new in a few days. I'm glad. Truly. He and I were connecting there about 5 minutes before all hell broke loose. I think we made a breakthrough. When he wakes up, he better not have amnesia. That was a lot of work I put in. No smile there either. He sucked in a gust of air and gripped the bed so tightly the steel creaked under his palms. I shifted in the bed so I could see him better. He looked not at all like the polished princeling I'd come to know. What's the problem? I asked. What were you thinking? He said, his tone somewhere between anger and threatening. I waved at him. What was I thinking? I was thinking my boss, the dumbass, went off half-cocked with no backup to take out the most powerful mage in existence. And you know what? I wasn't alone, so don't fucking get pissy with me. In this situation, only one of us did the stupid thing. And I'll give you a hint, it wasn't me. My voice was rising the angrier I got, but I couldn't stop it. By the end of my tirade, my ribs screamed, and a dull throb had taken root at the base of my skull. So much for the fuzzy pain meds I'd been enjoying. I didn't have to deal with this. I'd given him back his money a long time ago. That last mission had been more about the captain requesting my help than Finn. If he wanted to yell at someone, he could do it to someone he paid to stand there and take it. I shoved back the covers and swung my legs to the edge of the bed. The room swam around, so I gave myself a second to get orientated. What are you doing? Finn asked from behind me. I gripped the IV needle in my arm and jerked it out. The sting only lasted for a second, then I gripped the handle of the bed and shoved over the side. My knees buckled under my weight and I fell about a foot, having to use the bed for support. He put himself in my path. Get back in bed. You're not going anywhere. I shoved him hard, but it didn't move him an inch. You're not my boss anymore. I don't answer to you, and I don't have to sit here and listen to you berate me for something that was 100% your fault. He narrowed his eyes, and I knew I'd pushed him too far. The tingle of magic filled the air before my entire body locked up in front of him. No. He promised he'd never make me submit to his magic like this. Get back in bed, he said with a growl. With his magic choking my will from my body, I had no choice. I walked back to the bed, climbed inside, and threw the covers over my legs. A hot buzz started in my ears and cascaded through my body. Molten anger boiled along my veins, and I glared at him since it was the only expression he'd left free. I could only watch while he eased the IV into a different spot and then smoothed a fresh bandage over the wound. Tears rolled down my face. He just violated everything I held dear. My mind. My body. My free will. And when the bastard wouldn't look at me, I knew that he knew he'd fucked up by forcing me with his magic again, especially after promising me he wouldn't. It's for your own good, he whispered, and then he walked out of the room. I strained against the magic that bound me to the bed with any strength my battered body had left, but his magic held me flat in the bed. When I got free, I would skin him alive. I will never forgive him for this. With no other choice, I closed my eyes and waited for my strength to return. When I felt like I could try again, I began to slowly fight my way back. I wiggled my toes. Then my feet. Eventually, with more strength than should have been necessary, I got movement back into my hands and torso. Once I'd managed to buck his magic, my entire body shook from the effort. I jerked the fresh IV from my arm and dropped off the side of the bed. It was pitch black outside the window. The chill in the air told me the time must be early morning hours, but I couldn't be sure. No one prowled the halls, not even the guards the captain kept around like Pez dispenser people in the hallway. I hobbled toward the front of the mansion. The door hung open as if waiting for the next rush of people in need of medical attention. A car sat in the driveway, the same SUV and the same soldier who'd given me a ride previously. I opened the passenger side door and climbed into the front seat. He started from a doze to stare at me in shock. Shouldn't you? If you want to keep your balls where they are, you won't finish that sentence, I said. He nodded, and I waved at the steering wheel. Drive. Take me home. My job is done, and I'm ready for a hot shower and my own bed. He glanced back at the house and then unhooked his walkie from his vest. I gave a little shake of my head, and he clipped it back on, then drove away down the long drive. We traveled in silence, and I cursed Finn for living so far from civilization. Then I resolved it was better this way, since him living in the middle of nowhere would mean crossing paths in the city would be less likely. I never wanted to see that bastard again. The worst thing about the entire situation was the dull ache in my chest. We'd both known we were on the brink of more. Of doing more and being more together. I didn't sleep with clients, but I'd found myself thinking about him that way. Now I would never know what might have happened if we had let ourselves. The driver shifted behind the wheel, and I stared at him from where I rested my face against the door. You okay? Not going to die on the way to my house, are you? No, ma'am. Ah, don't call me ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I'm fine. I faced out the window as the city lights come into view. Maybe it was time to seek out Hawk again. Go see the chief. Hawk had made it seem like the old man actually missed me. Unlikely, but the chief would never admit that he missed me to my face, so I would never know. We pulled up outside my apartment and I climbed out. The driver came around to help, but I waved him away. Go home, Junior. I have a feeling they're going to need you there more than I do. But I should. I leveled him a glare. Just go. I'm no longer on your boss's payroll, so you have no obligation to stay parked outside my house. He didn't look convinced, but he still got back into the SUV and drove away. The trek inside my apartment was excruciating. Who knew stairs weren't easy to navigate with severe head trauma? I made it inside and kept the lights off. Every beam seemed to burn my eyes. Even the shimmering street lamps slanting through my blinds caused a deep ache in my temples. For about 5 seconds, I debated on taking a shower to scrub the blood from my hair, but I decided against it. The hot water might put me on my ass, and then I would have to call an ambulance and end up as one of those stories they told during the holiday season to their families. No thank you. I lowered myself onto my bed and lay out flat. The room spun around me as the pain meds sloshed through my system. Some tightness along my ribs had eased. Finn must have shoved some healing in me when he forced his magic on my body. The thought drew a fresh wave of anger through me. If Finn so much as breathed near me, he would earn an elbow to the nose. For now, the soft sounds of the city outside my window and the heady mix of medical-grade painkillers lulled me to sleep with a pocket watch clutched so tightly into my palm I'd almost forgotten it was there. Chapter 2. How many times in the past week had I woken up with this exact feeling? Emptiness. Loneliness. A lump lodged so deep in my chest it felt like it would never be free. With the sunlight slanting through my windows and my stomach reminding me I hadn't eaten in far too long, I braced myself to get out of bed. Every single nerve ending in my body ached. The captain had taken so much worse. It seemed rude to complain, considering I hadn't had my teeth rearranged by a bullet. I sat up slowly in the rumpled covers of my bed. Somehow I'd kicked the top sheet off the bed onto the floor, but it was still tucked in under the mattress at the end. My ribs protested with each movement. I should hate him, I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't quite push myself all the way to loathing. Even after what he'd done, which to me was one of the worst things he could do. He knew how much I didn't want other people in my mind. Especially when he was using his power to control me. It was an invasion of my basic human rights, my privacy. My will. I tested my limbs with gentle twists and turns, stretching where I felt comfortable and holding back where pain flared through me. The blood crust in my hair told me a shower should be my first priority. It took me so long to wash everything that needed it, the water had chilled by the end of the shower. I was pretty sure I still had blood in my hair, but I couldn't move in the correct ways to check everything. I dressed economically in a t-shirt and leggings and left my wet hair hanging loose on my shoulders. I crossed to my bedroom door and stopped with my hand on the knob. The last time I'd woken up in similar circumstances, Finn had been rustling around my apartment. I let myself feel the tiniest little glimmer of hope that he would be here again. That when I stepped into my small kitchen, he would be standing tall over my too-low stove cooking bacon that was probably expired. I wasn't naive enough to think he would actually be out there waiting for me, but I enjoyed the thought while it lasted. I exited my bedroom and stepped into my empty living room area. Did it feel emptier now, or was that just me? With nothing else to do, I made some toast and coffee. One thing I'd learned when healing major wounds, especially with magical help, I needed to increase my calorie intake. I was thankful all my food hadn't gone bad since I'd been staying at Finn's house, but I had to drink my coffee black since the milk looked suspicious. I shoved the toast in my mouth and eyed the bowl of apples on my counter. I didn't intend to leave my apartment today, so I'd have some of them later. When I sat down at my desk, it took me a moment to sort out my feelings. When I'd left Finn's house the last time, maybe some part of me thought I would be going back. This time I couldn't. It wasn't just a matter of pride. He'd hurt me. Worse than anyone. I ran my mental fingers over the bond Finn and I shared. It was no longer the gaping hole it was last night, as if when I healed it had scarred over. Somehow I could still feel Finn on the other side. Did he hurt as much as I did? The vindictive part of me hoped so. I faced my desk and dug for my laptop in the bottom drawer. Once I got it set up and started the various updates loading, I went through some of my emails. Most of it was from former clients. A few invoices. One of the emails was from Hawk, which I deleted. While I wasn't ready yet to return, working with my clients again would be much easier with the office's backing. It wasn't just about the physical space, it was the little details that made life as a bounty hunter easier. Things like interrogation cells. The last time I interrogated a subject successfully, he broke so nicely. Then there were the easy pickups. I didn't have to sling anybody over my shoulder and carry them away. Pedestrians stared when that happened. As much of an asshole as he was, I appreciated Hawk both as a supervisor and as the chief's best friend. He'd been in my life almost as long as the chief himself. Once I was done hunting the Black Mage, I needed to clear the air between the chief and me. I couldn't go back before that happened. I needed to figure out how to mold my current environment to fit my client list. I'd never been dry for clients, so it wasn't as if I couldn't find work when I needed it. I bit my lip. If I was desperate, there was always the first paycheck from Finn's employment I hadn't cashed. That would cover me for the next few years. My laptop sputtered and beeped at me. I dug the charging cable out from somewhere under the desk, my ribs protesting every single movement as I plugged it in. Maybe that would be my first big purchase, a new laptop. I could certainly use it. I remembered the pocket watch I'd stolen off Esteban, then smuggled out of Finn's house. I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction, thinking about Finn and how angry he would be for my having taken it. To be fair, he probably didn't even know about its existence. I shuffled back to my bedroom and dug through the blankets to find the pocket watch, but came up with nothing. But it had to be here, somewhere. I skirted around the mattress, hunting until I spotted it underneath the edge of my bed frame. With a groan, I bent down and snagged the watch. Standing upright actually hurt more than the bending. I took the watch back out to my desk and sat it on the scarred wood surface. The watch had a sort of antique bronze finish. The engraved cover over the face swung open with a push of a button to reveal a normal-looking watch. Maybe I'd stolen the Black Mage's family heirloom? Not likely. The magic simmered and sizzled in my palm when I touched it. Initials were etched on the front of the watch, and some kind of language I didn't recognize inscribed on the back. No, this was no ordinary watch. I would bet my life on it. I pushed the button again and again, opening the face of the watch to see if that did anything. The feel of the magic didn't change. The surface or weight of the watch didn't alter as I picked it up and hefted it in my palm. So how did it work? Could it be like my magical blades, which sang to the person who should own them? Did all magical objects call out to their owners? I tried to connect to the watch again, using the same senses I did when I touched the bond between Finn and me. Of course, nothing happened. The watch sat there mocking me and my inability to make it bend to my will. Maybe I should have gotten more magical instructions before burning all my magical bridges. A magic-wielding person of any kind would suit. Anyone except Finn. Did I know anyone else with magic besides Finn and the captain? There had to be a way for people like me to learn magic. If anyone could find the way, I could. Hunting people was the one thing I excelled at. Hunting information came second, since often I plucked it from their mouths while I beat the shit out of them. I doubted I could get help with my magic that way. When the captain came to me to help Finn, he directed me to focus my awareness. I tried that, but it proved fruitless on the watch. I considered how I connected to my black steel blades. Thinking about them made my heart hurt. I'd left them at Finn's in my haste to get away. Maybe the captain would send them to me? They were the only thing I wanted out of that house. I opened up the browser on my laptop, my wrists hovering over the watch. Quickly I typed in how to do magic. As usual, I should have thought that through. The first search results were related to pulling rabbits out of hats and making damsels disappear. Not a problem I currently faced. I tapped the spacebar a few times while I thought about what else to type. Then I typed in fairy and mage magic. I hit enter harder than probably necessary. Maybe this was why my laptop didn't like me. The first results that popped up were related to fantasy novels. A lot of fantasy novels were written as a way for the humans who knew about magical creatures to process that fact, but I didn't have 100 years to read 1,000-page novels to pick apart what was truth and what was fiction. I cleared the search bar and considered what I needed to know a little more thoroughly. Then typed in fairy and mage artifacts and hit enter. Instead of searching through the link results, I hit the image button and scrolled through the images. A lot of them were related to swords and weapons. Most of them were also fictional or from movies. Again, nothing that would help me sort out the mystery of the stupid watch. I closed the laptop with a slam and sat back in the chair. My ribs fucking hurt. I should start thinking about some kind of protection for them if I did any more fighting. Allowing myself a moment of weakness, I went back into the kitchen and dug through my junk drawer to find a bottle of aspirin. It was expired, but anything right now was better than nothing. I grabbed a bottle of water from my refrigerator, tossed back 4 of the pills and washed the chalky taste down my throat. I took the remaining water and sat back at my desk. The watch gleamed in the morning sunlight, and the fact that it sat there doing absolutely nothing pissed me off. No, that wasn't right. It was the pain. I should have stolen the hospital-grade painkillers from Finn's house before I left. Maybe I could bribe the captain to bring me some of them too. Or one of the IVs the medical staff kept locked up that contained the good drugs. In a pinch, I could do a field IV if necessary. Something I should have done for the captain while he lay bleeding out in the helicopter. Surely there'd been one in the first aid kit? But in the heat of the moment, I'd floundered on the medical training the chief had drilled into me over the years. Always basic stuff, but the basics could keep a wounded person stable until more experienced hands could take over. I turned the watch over in my palm and studied the inscription on the back. The language was all looping swirls and symbols. Nothing I recognized even from my fiction reading experience. Another idea popped in my head. I dug into the top drawer of my desk and took out a small toolkit. It contained a tiny spectacle screwdriver that I never seemed to throw away despite the fact that I didn't wear glasses. I eyed the small screws on the back of the watch, each one perfectly spaced and blended seamlessly with antique bronze. The tip of the screwdriver fit into the cross hatches of the screws. I carefully applied pressure and gave it a little twist. A jolt flashed through me. I jerked my hand away. The damn thing had shocked me. My fingertips throbbed and ached, the pain radiated up to my wrist. If this damn thing didn't hold a clue about the Black Mage or his magic and how to bring him down, I would throw it out my window and gleefully laugh as cars rolled over the stupid thing. I tossed the screwdriver back into the toolkit and the entire packet back into my desk. It landed with a thump amidst other junk and debris. With a sigh, I opened my laptop again. The web browser still sat front and center, so I tapped the spacebar while I considered what else I could search for. Another idea occurred to me. Pain might make me grumpy, but it was also motivating. I typed in watch repair shops and clicked on the local search function. This time I hit enter slightly more gently. A neat list of jewelry stores popped up. Most of them specialized in watch repair or battery replacement. I scanned through the list, hunting for one that could repair antique watches. A more specialized skill. When I landed on a name I recognized, I smiled. Abraham. He was an old client who'd hired me to hunt down an employee who stole from him. It was a successful job and the man gave me a large tip. He might be a good place to start. It wasn't an amazing lead, but I'd gone on less before. When I had nothing, the tiniest glimmers of hope got me to the next moment, until each of those moments could be strung together to support the threads of my life. Chapter 3. Getting dressed was now my least favorite thing. My ribs hurt after the shower, even with my muscles warm from the scorching water. Cold and grumpy, everything felt like it was breaking all over again. I slipped into jeans and an oversized sweatshirt before heading out the door. Thankfully, my expired painkillers had already started working their way through my system. The jewelry dealer I planned to see only took meetings by appointment, but if I showed up scratching at his door, he would likely let me in. When I hit the curb outside my apartment, I called for a car ride. The shop was only a couple miles north of me, but I didn't want to hoof it all the way there in my condition. I didn't want any witnesses to how far I'd fallen. The car pulled up a couple of minutes after I called it. We sped uptown in record time. Upon arrival, I tipped the man with my app and climbed out, mindful of my stiff muscles and aching ribcage. The jewelry store fit in well with the other upscale shops along the block, with beautiful clean lines, shiny windows, and overpriced pieces. I tapped on the glass door and waited, settling my hands into my pockets to keep them warm. After a few minutes, Abraham came to the door and gave me a puzzled look through the glass. I motioned at him to unlock it and let me in, which he did. Once I stepped inside, he locked the door behind me and scanned me with a furrowed brow. "What are you doing here, Zoey?" I shrugged and gave him a little smile. "Oh, just getting an early start on my Christmas shopping." He wasn't buying my shit. Not that he ever did. I pulled the watch from my pocket and passed it to him. "I had something I wanted you to take a look at." He tugged his glasses from the top of his bald head and perched them on his nose. Then he examined the watch, turning it over in his hands a couple of inches in front of his face. "Where did you get this?" Can I say no comment and get away with it? He narrowed his eyes at me over the watch and then resumed his study. "I don't think I can help you." I huffed. "Okay, is it because I can't tell you where I got it, or because you don't know what it is?" He handed the watch back. "It's not because of either of those things." I took the watch and carefully shoved it back in the large pocket in front of my hoodie. "Do you want to elaborate on that?" He simply blinked at me, then said, "No comment." Wow. This morning was off to a great start. I gave him a nod and headed for the door. "Thanks for nothing, Abraham." I let myself out, and he locked the door solidly behind me. It sounded like an admonition. Either he knew more than he wanted to share, or he knew nothing and didn't want to get involved. Something told me it was the latter. Abraham liked to stay in his own little world, safe and secure. I stood on the sidewalk and monitored the people passing. I needed to come up with a new plan. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I tugged it out to look at the screen. I ignored the tiny part of me that hoped it was Finn texting me. Of course it wasn't. The message was from Abraham's cell. Strange. The text read, "Call Alex," with a phone number after it. I turned to stare back into the shop window, but Abraham wasn't within sight. Okay, maybe I didn't need a new plan. I shot a quick text to thank him, then dialed the number and made an appointment. They could only see me tomorrow, which left me an entire afternoon stuck with my pain and my thoughts, both completely unacceptable. There was one task on my to-do list I dreaded. Going back to the forest of my dreams, well, nightmares was probably a more accurate description. But I might as well get it over with now, so I didn't have to think about it again. I opened another app on my phone and ordered a car rental for the day. I usually hated doing that because it cost a ridiculous amount of money, and Hawk always complained about it whenever I put it on an expense report. After I picked up the car, I headed out to the forest that Finn and I had pretty much died in. I didn't let myself think about whether I was being an idiot or just extra thorough. The car they gave me was a little 4-door black sedan. It had excellent gas mileage, which I appreciated. I focused on the road, the trees, the signs. Anything to keep my mind from drifting toward Finn or the captain's status. I couldn't believe Finn hadn't texted or called to let me know how the captain was feeling. To be fair, maybe he didn't want to talk to me just as much as I didn't want to talk to him. After a while, I turned on the radio, even though I hated listening to the news, but it gave me a way to engage my thoughts without having to actively shift them every few seconds. It took 3.5 hours to get to the forest. Definitely faster by that death machine helicopter. I parked in the same clearing where we all got our asses handed to us the previous night. Had it only been one night, I was probably being stupid coming out here alone, unarmed, injured. But I just knew I'd missed something. That there'd be a clue that would lead me to the next step. I had to find the Black Mage. And this was the place to look. I climbed out of the car and peered around the trees. Definitely still had that same eerie get-under-your-skin quality as it usually did. The air held a distinct chill. I marched across the clearing, scanning for any evidence of the fight that had occurred, but I spotted nothing. No weapons, no blood. Someone must have come out and cleaned up the scene. Had it been Finn or the Black Mage's men? I took my time wandering around the edge of the tree line, inspecting the pine needles for anything that might have been missed. I found nothing. Whoever cleaned this place had been a professional. I almost owed them a sort of grudging respect, because I distinctly remembered a lot of blood. On my second pass through the circle, the brush in the dense forest rustled. Why the hell didn't I think to bring any weapons with me? I blamed my pain level and 2-year-old medication I probably shouldn't have taken. I pressed my back into a large tree. Its girth hid me from the view of anyone who might be coming up from behind. But if anybody veered off to one side or the other, they could see me in the periphery. The rustling continued and I monitored it until it got closer. When the sounds grew near the clearing, I felt around on the ground near my feet for a branch or rock. All I caught were a handful of chunky pine cones. Well, beggars can't be choosers. A figure cut across my vision to my left. I launched a pine cone, then bolted in the opposite direction. Hands clamped around my hips. I swung around to hit whoever grabbed me in the head. Before I made contact, I stopped. Finn stared down at me, a red welt smack in the center of his forehead. I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped. I don't know what to say. I'm definitely not apologizing. You should have dodged that. He tugged me in closer until I batted his hands on my hips away. What are you doing here, Zoey? I narrowed my eyes. If people stop asking me that, I'm gonna finally start feeling welcome. Confusion flashed in his eyes. You should be at home getting the rest that you need. You're still healing. I rolled my eyes. It's not like I'm doing anything more strenuous than sitting on my ass for a really long car ride and taking a little walk in the woods. Whether I was home or here, my ribs were gonna hurt. At least while I was doing something, I was partially distracted. What if the Black Mage's men came back? You didn't even bring any weapons with you. I put my hands on my hips and glared at him. Obviously, because I left my best weapons at your house. After you tried to hold me hostage. Something else flashed his eyes. It wasn't anger or fear. Guilt, maybe? You're being dramatic. I blinked twice at him and then threw up my hands. I have somewhere to be. I swung away from him and marched back toward my car. 3 hours of driving, and I spent 5 minutes in the place only to be confronted by the one man I wanted to avoid. I climbed in the driver's seat and slammed the door. With a long sigh, I dropped my head against the seat headrest and closed my eyes. Why had he come here? I hadn't been ready to see him yet. He stood in the center of the clearing, hands crossed under his armpits, watching me in the car. His hair hung loose around his shoulders. He looked well rested and damn good. I hated him for that. Especially when I looked like a hot mess. After I took a few deep breaths, cursing Finn's name, I climbed back out of the car and confronted him. You're a dick, I said. He narrowed his eyes and ambled closer. How eloquent. Is that the best you can do? I shoved at him, but my ribs screamed with agony. Obviously fucking not, but it's the best you're going to get without giving me medication to help with the pain fogging my brain. I repeat, you are a dick. The corner of his mouth ticked up. What do you want, Zoey? Go home and get some rest. Fuck you. I'm only standing here looking at your face because I want to know how the captain is. That made him stop and finally square off with me. Why? You couldn't give a shit about him last week. Why do you care so much now? Maybe because last week he was a dick too, and last week he hadn't been shot in the face. Let's start there and see if I can come up with anything else while you scold me like an overprotective grandma. He blinked at me, the bloom of his grin stripped away. If you want to know how the captain is, you'll have to come see him yourself. I'm not stepping foot in that house again, I yelled. You can fuck right off. Everything in me boiled with the need to spew it out and do so much more damage. He had hurt me, and he didn't even act like he was sorry for it. If he could disregard my needs so easily, obviously we were never friends to begin with. We glared at each other until I shook my head and spun away before anything as stupid as tears fell. They built up slowly, and I kept my gaze up toward the canopy to keep them confined. I didn't let people make me cry, and if by some miracle they managed it, I sure as shit wouldn't let them witness it. His hand clamped on my shoulder and I shrugged it off despite the pain the movement caused. Zoey, look at me. His tone was the same imperious command as it ever was. Go to hell, I said, happy the hitch in my throat didn't cause my voice to wobble. Get some rest, he said, not at all bothered by my outburst. I'll send a doctor by to get you some pain meds and an IV set up. You'll feel better. Do you want me to heal you? A fresh surge of heat shot through me and I spun back to face him despite the tears escaping to roll down my face in a hot wave. No, I don't want your fucking pity or your charity. I only want to know how the captain is doing. And I want my fucking steel back. Otherwise, you can stay out of my life and I'll stay out of yours. With nothing more to say, I turned and stormed back to my car. This time, I didn't linger to watch him and let myself be dragged back into an argument. Somehow, he knew where to push and pull to wear down my resolve. He knew exactly how to make me forgive him. Not this time. I wanted the bastard to burn, and eventually, once I healed up and took care of the Black Mage myself, he would. It had been a long time since I'd let a man hurt me the way he had. When will you fucking learn, Zoey? I sped out of the clearing, pine needles spinning up behind the wheels of my car. I used to be stronger than this. I used to be able to keep people at enough of a distance, they couldn't weasel their way in and actually do damage. My walls needed tightening, starting with the ones around my heart. That way, Finn would never get in again. As I drove away from the forest, I caught sight of Finn in the rear-view mirror surrounded by pine needles and the dirt my tires had spun up. Served him right for following me after I told him off. I focused on the road ahead. A shape stood in the middle of the road on my side. What the hell? Finn was there, his arms crossed over his chest as though he waited in line, not in the middle of a deserted highway while a car sped toward him. I wished I could feign like I might hit him. Play chicken with the immortal Phi. But it just wasn't in me. Even as angry as I was, it wasn't worth it if he couldn't fight back. With a groan, I slowed and pulled to the side of the road. He marched across the asphalt, ripped my car door open, and yanked me out by the sleeve of my jacket. We weren't finished talking. Chapter 4. I shoved Finn out of my personal space, my side singing in pain with the move. I was done talking when you controlled my mind last night after promising never to do it again. Where's your stupid Phi honor? He huffed and spun away, his shoulders rigid and tight. I gaped at him. Wait a second, you're angry with me? We saved your damn life and the captain almost died, but you're mad at me. I exhaled through my mouth and forced myself to calm down. Having a heart attack in the middle of a deserted road wouldn't help anyone, and I'd had enough of Finn's hospitality. What are you doing here? What do you want? I asked, working hard to keep my voice level. It was a long way from calm, but I would take what I could get that wasn't a shrill shriek. He rounded on me again, his face a perfect mask of composure. The same thing I was doing before you walked out on me, Zoey, looking for my sister. Something like sadness tinted his words. What do you want from me? I sighed, feeling some of the anger leach out of me. I gave everything I had to try and find her. I've almost died a couple of times for my effort. Besides, I gave you your money back, and I'm heading home so you can go off and do whatever it is you think you can do to find her. How long has it been? Decades. What makes you think you'll find the real her here? He narrowed his eyes and took a step forward. What did you hope to find here? Refusing to retreat, I matched him and took a step toward him. I clutched the watch in my pocket and swallowed the confession pinging around my brain. I don't know, but I had some time to myself and thought I'd at least come back and check for clues. It seems you got here first. Did you find anything? He shook his head and glanced down at his feet. This was why I wanted to get the hell away from him. Now I felt sorry for the bastard instead of boiling anger. Like he knew exactly where to press to shift my moods. Not this time. I wouldn't allow him to drag me back into his mess of a life. Not when he gave me nothing in return. Have a nice life, Finn, I said and grabbed the car door which still hung open behind me. When he drew in his next breath loudly, it wobbled, as did his voice when he spoke. I chose you. It took me a moment to realize what he'd said, to filter it through my pain-addled brain and decipher the words. I spun back to face him. I forced myself to really see him, maybe for the first time, as a man instead of the fairy tale I'd built up around him and his race and his magic. Say that again, I said. He exhaled softer this time. I chose you. After years of searching, I chose you, and then I couldn't rectify the consequences in my head. Not after spending so much of my life seeking revenge, trying to find out what happened to her. I didn't intend to tell him about Saul, not after the way he'd treated me. Especially not after he'd violated my free will. But damn it, watching him suffer only hurt me more. Your sister wasn't there last night, I said, forcing out the words. That girl. It wasn't Saul. It was another one of his tricks. He was toying with all of us. Finn dropped his gaze to the concrete, still perfectly content to stand in the middle of the road. Finally he said, I know. Some part of me realized it last night. It's been haunting me. Would I have still made the same decision if she'd actually been there? Would I have somehow known it was Saul and chosen her instead of you? Do you want me to thank you for the choice you made? The one you rubbed in my face immediately afterward as I fought to stay alive. The one you used as an excuse to break your promise to me. I squared my shoulders and glared at him. I won't. Nor will I apologize for being here, for being alive, or for you having to make the choice in the first place. We all knew what we were getting into. Worse, you raced off on your own, thinking you could do what we all couldn't do together. You should be thankful you're alive. Not me. Even more so after you walked out on me last night. I waited for the backlash. Instead, he closed the distance between us until I could see the glowing crystals around his irises. I know you've lost people, so I won't pretend like you don't know what that feels like, he said, but please consider that feeling multiplied tenfold over decades. With so many friends and family gone, sometimes I lose my head when it comes to keeping everyone safe. What does that have to do with me? I'm just your employee, I said. We've been far more than that for some time, but my pride wouldn't budge. Not even for him. He reached out and traced the edge of my jaw with his index finger. If you believed that, truly believed it, then you wouldn't be so angry and raw right now. The wind caught his hair, sending it spiraling around his neck. I couldn't look away as he inched toward me, a hunter creeping up on his prey. You betrayed my trust in the most brutal way, I choked out. When I was already vulnerable. You forced me to fight for my dignity while I fought for my life. I don't know if I can forgive you for that. With a sigh, he dropped his hand. The distance between us grew wider, a chasm neither of us could breach. I know. I don't know if I can forgive myself for that either. We needed to change the subject. I couldn't handle all these emotions. His or mine. Will you tell me how the captain is, please? Finn's eyes widened briefly as though he was surprised by the topic change. But then he answered my question. He's fine. Doing better. After his surgery, I used an old healing ritual as my power was quite tapped out. He is already up and bossing everyone around again. He keeps asking after you too. I snorted. He has my phone number. He can call. Finn tucked his chin. A wash of pink rose high on his cheekbones. I think he believes that calling you would mean betraying my trust. As if he's supposed to be on my side. But he's also punishing me by stationing guards every few feet, while forcing me to hunt for a staff member he thinks is a spy. Since he's suffered a mortal injury, of course. A small smile slipped across his lips as if he were encouraging my own. I scowled and turned back to the car. I have to go. He reached out to grasp my shoulder. Please. Let me do a little more healing on you. It will help you do whatever you need to get done. I don't like seeing you in pain. I shoved his hand away but didn't face him. Then I guess stop hurting me, and maybe you won't have to see me like this. You know what I mean. He stood so close I could feel the warmth from his body in waves around me. It would take nothing to lean back into his strength, let him lend me some for a while. To wash away the pain and turn it into something else. I shook my head. I really have to go. I have a long way back to the city and a lot of stuff to do. If he knew I was lying, he didn't show it. His face remained perfectly neutral in my peripheral vision. All he did was nod once as if giving me permission to run away. I really do have somewhere to be, I tried again. Tomorrow, not today, but he didn't need to know that. I had no clue why I felt the need to justify walking away from him. Stop it, I said, so quietly the words were almost lost to the wind rippling through the trees. Stop what? I looked back up at him. The scent of ozone in the air wafted off him, and all I could think about was kissing him right now. Despite the betrayal, the anger, and our short but adventurous history, it was all I wanted. Are you controlling my mind? I asked. It seemed like the only logical explanation. He dropped his shoulders. No, I've done nothing to your mind. Why? Do you feel compelled to do something against your will? I studied his face. The full pink lips, which I knew were pillow soft. The silky fall of his hair tangling around his neck and face. But above all, I couldn't drag my eyes away from his. Not with this feeling swirling around inside me. Before I could think about it too hard, I reached out and grabbed his t-shirt, grabbing him into me at the same time I stepped to him. I planted my lips on his. His mouth opened into mine, yielding to me. The scent of ozone rose to a crackle around us, making the fine hairs on my forearms prickle. He tasted like mint and the forest and a rainstorm. When his fingers grabbed around my biceps, I pulled away, panting softly against his mouth, my fingers still tangled in the soft cotton of his shirt. Not a perfect kiss, but a damn good one. Even if I ambushed him into it. The glow in his eyes was brighter when I finally forced my gaze to his. Don't, Zoey. I know you want to run right now, but don't. Stay with me. Let me take you home. Though what he said was innocuous, he was offering so much more with his words. He was offering himself. A few days ago, I would have been happy with his request, with something sexy, if not simple, between us. Now, I knew he didn't see me as an equal. How could he if he'd so easily invaded my mind and enforced his will? Had he ever violated the captain that way? Something told me probably not. As much as my body yearned for more, despite the sheer pain overwhelming me, which spoke volumes about his kissing abilities, I couldn't give in now. I would never be able to completely surrender myself. I swallowed hard and released him. Goodbye, Finn. I hopped in the car and pulled away. This time, he didn't chase after me. He didn't call me back through our bond, nor did he even send a text message. Maybe I'd gotten through to him. Now, if only I could get my own brain on board with leaving Finn in the dust where he belonged. Chapter 5. When I returned home after my run-in with Finn, my body protested every movement, especially on the stairs leading up to my apartment. Every single step was a test of my willpower to see if I could lift my leg one more time. When I finally got to the top of the stairs, my breathing ragged and my muscles screaming, there was no way I was bending down to pick up the large cardboard box sitting on my welcome mat. Once I fished my keys out of my bag and opened the door, I nudged the box inside with my boot and closed the door behind me. Since I didn't want to stay stooped as I dug through the box, I realized I had to bend down, pick it up, and plunk it on my desk. Shit. I may have moaned in pain once or twice as I did so, but at least no one was there to hear me. When I opened the lid, I sighed with a combination of happiness and resentment. Inside were an impressive array of painkillers, several bottles of electrolyte-infused water, some cans of soup, and my black steel knives. The pain had addled my brain so much I hadn't felt them so near to me. Now, I needed to kill whoever thought it was a good idea to leave this box on my step unprotected. A job for another time. I dug out a bottle of painkillers, hopped one pill in my mouth, opened a fancy water, and chugged it back. For now, bed was where I needed to be. I trudged to my bedroom like a zombie from The Walking Dead. There I fell onto the mattress, and managed to get partly beneath my sheets before I passed out. My alarm woke me and I scrambled out of bed, assuming I was late for something important. Once upright, and out of the tangle of my bedding, I noticed only a twinge in my sides as I moved. Nothing else ached or throbbed or screamed at me. This revelation did its own little number on my internals. I told Finn I didn't want him to heal me, and he did it anyway. As soon as I finished with my contact, I was going out to his house to pound in his stupid pretty face. He wouldn't get away with interfering in my choices anymore. The high-handed bastard. I seethed through my shower so much that I felt like actual steam ran off me from the spray of the water. Getting ready turned out to be a lot faster when I wasn't moving through waves of pain. I stood outside Alex's office 10 minutes early, though it was little more than a warehouse with a shady shopfront. Abraham had said this guy would be able to help me identify the watch, but I was getting a weird feeling about the place already. I kept my head down and ignored the people who eyeballed me where I leaned against the nondescript building. Deep in the shady part of town wasn't a new place for me, but the fresh ass-kicking I'd suffered made me feel vulnerable under their stares. I couldn't walk around with my knives strapped to me. The office revoked my licenses when they kicked me out, so I'd lost the ability to openly carry a weapon. I'd need to pick up a back sheath for my knives when I had time so I could carry them concealed. Not legal, of course, but I'd never worried about walking that line. A small hunched man with gray flecked hair and a briefcase ambled up the sidewalk toward me. When he caught sight of me, he froze. I stared at him, waiting for him to make the decision to approach or not. "I have nothing you can steal," he called from 20 feet away. I shrugged. "Great, because I don't have anything you can steal either. I'm looking for Alex." His eyes lit up a little. "I'm Alex." I inclined my head. "Then I'm your first appointment for the day." Something entered his eyes then. The sharp fear disappeared as though it had never really been there. I didn't trust him. My gut told me to turn around and walk away quickly, but if he had information, I couldn't run until I at least got a clue about the watch or where to hunt for what I needed. He unlocked a heavy steel door to the right of the shop front, and held it open enough for me to enter behind him. The inside of his shop looked more like a warehouse than a business. Boxes were neatly stacked and labeled. Most of them appeared way too big for jewelry or watch repair. He hurried off to the corner of the huge room and entered a small office in the back. "What kind of business are you in, Alex?" Alex is a code name, of a sort. "My name is Echo," he called from the corner of the crowded room. Code name, interesting. I didn't miss the fact that he hadn't answered my original question about what sort of business he was in. "My friend Abraham said you have something that might interest me," he said as he returned, weaving through the crates and boxes. He'd put on a thick pair of glasses and a brown fuzzy cardigan. Just an innocuous old man, his image said. I didn't believe it for a second. "I have something that recently came into my possession," I said. "It's not for sale, but I'm hoping I can find more information about it." "And," he prompted, holding his hands out toward me. My gut told me I would regret this. Sometimes my gut said that and it turned out absolutely right. Sometimes I only regretted my actions a little. "Tell me more about your business, Mr. Echo. Have you ever dealt in Phi artifacts?" He considered me more sharply. "What does a little thing like you know about Phi artifacts? How about mage artifacts? Is that what you brought me?" "A magical artifact?" he asked, eagerness getting the better of him as he closed the distance between us. "I don't buy or sell them, but I consider myself somewhat of a collector. I've got extensive knowledge of non-weapon artifacts. But if you know anything about either species, you know most of the magical objects out in the open are weapons, often found in old battlefields and basements. Is that right? Did Abraham tell you what I wanted you to look at?" He nodded. "He said you have a watch that might prove to be more." Icy fingers danced up and down my spine, but I ignored them. I shrugged, trying to play off my nerves. "Probably not. It's likely just a watch, but I wanted to know more about it." "May I, my dear?" he asked, smiling at me with teeth that looked razor sharp. "All the better to eat you with." My good sense and my intuition warred with my need to know the truth. There was also the large part of me that desired to keep Finn out of my life. With a deep breath, I reached into my pocket and cupped the watch in my hand. Making direct eye contact with him, I said, "If you try anything, I will hunt you down and kill you." Not even a hint of worry entered his eyes. Either he didn't see me as a threat, or he had something up his sleeve. I extracted the watch from my pocket and held it out for him. Almost reverently, he reached forward and took it from my grip. Without another word, he marched over to a table by the wall, rigged up with lights and magnifying glasses. I followed him, staying close. He may be trying to look harmless, but I'd been pulling that trick for ages. It always worked, and for good reason. "Where did you say you got this?" he asked, focusing through a magnifier, the watch steady in his aged palm. I didn't. "Do you see anything helpful?" I leaned forward in an attempt to get a look. The man lifted his face and glared at me. "Do you mind? I can't work with you breathing down the back of my neck." I held my hands up in surrender. "Fine. Do what you need to do." Some of the niggling at my senses had faded. I still watched him, alert and wary, but my need to run wasn't vibrating through me anymore. Maybe all the time I'd been spending on high alert had messed up my internal radar. The shop seemed normal enough, and even if he was just some kind of illegal goods fencer, I didn't care about that. Nor would many in my profession, since we often got work from fencers hunting down individuals who hadn't paid or who'd stolen something. I perused some of the closest shelves to me and noted one box clearly labeled weapons. So much for his protestations against them. Another box was labeled metalcraft and another black steel. Mr. Echo grew more and more interesting by the second. "You really should tell me where you acquired this piece, Ms." He lifted his head and studied me. "You didn't give me your name." "Zoey." "Of course, Ms. Zoey. If you can tell me anything about the provenance of this watch, I might be able to give you more information." I slipped on my dumb girl face and smiled, all ease and sunshine now. "Like what? Can't we just say I found it somewhere?" He narrowed his eyes. "Did you steal this?" I waved around the room at all the boxes. Sounds like an accusation coming from a man whose business is built on stolen goods. Magical stolen goods, if some of these labels are correct. He cocked his head as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle just the right way. "You can read the labels?" I tapped the one next to me, the one with the weapons label. "Of course. They're in English. This one obviously says weapons." The smile on his lips now unnerved me. "Does it? Look again." I glanced back at the label. Before, the word weapons had been clearly typed out in perfect Times New Roman font behind its little plastic frame. Now the label showed a line of squiggles and swirls. The same squiggles and swirls etched into the back of the watch. I blinked and cleared the surprise from my features. Well, fuck, I don't know what happened there. I forgot to eat breakfast. Must be a little light-headed. His answering smile told me he didn't believe a damn thing I said. Thankfully, he only turned back to the watch and opened the face of it to study more. I kept glancing at the labels again, my heart pounding louder than normal. The labels remained a strange swirling script. His voice broke through my reverie and I focused on him. "If you perhaps told me where you acquired it, no matter the means of acquisition, it might give me more of a hint as to what I should be looking for." "Can you try that again? Just tell me what you want." He huffed as if I'd offended his delicate sensibilities. "Did you steal it from a fae or a mage, young lady?" "See, wasn't that way easier than dancing around things?" I said with a nod. "I stole it from a mage." The shimmer of appreciation in his eye made me think he didn't have any love for mages. Or maybe they were more difficult to steal from. Yet more mysteries about Mr. Echo I needed to assimilate. "And did you steal it from a residence or off their person?" He continued his focus on the watch again. "Tell me why it matters and I'll answer your question." Mages are adept at protecting themselves and their belongings. If this piece passed through a warding spell of some kind, it might be glamored to look like an innocent watch, but the reality of it could be something completely different. In 2 seconds, I'd gotten more of a straight answer about magic than Finn or the captain gave me in all the time we'd worked together. And it makes a difference if I'd taken it from their house or off them. Why? He stared at me, his cloudy brown eyes steady despite the stack of lines his forehead made as he watched me. Because why would a mage go through the effort of enchanting something to look like another thing if it were safe and sound in his home? Fair point. From what I'd seen, fae and mage magic wasn't limitless. There were peaks and reservoirs to it, but why waste the magic when they didn't need to? "Off his person then," I murmured, not exactly proud I'd stolen something that belonged to someone else. Even if that person was the devil incarnate. And was it during battle or in passing? When I didn't answer, he let out a frustrated huff. Again, a mage's wardings are different depending on whether they are picking up coffee or if they are protecting their life. First order of magical business, find out what these wardings are and how to do them. Maybe the ability would save my lungs from eventual puncturing. Telling him I'd stolen it during a fight might give him what he needed to provide me more about the watch. However, revealing I'd fought a mage, stolen his belongings, and still survived would also reveal something about myself to this stranger. It wasn't worth the risk. Sorry, let's call that question a draw. I won't answer it. He'd already gone back to prodding the watch face with a small instrument, no longer paying attention to me. I circled back around to how much this man had already revealed about magic to me. It made me angry at Finn all over again. Why didn't I learn any of this stuff the moment he realized I had magic? He knew I could fight, so obviously discipline wasn't a problem. So what held him back? The answer crept into my head and it made my heart ache. My mage blood had to be the only reason. He didn't fully trust me. I mentally touched the bond inside myself. It no longer felt ragged and aching. It didn't sparkle and shine like it once did, but it was solid. I pulled away before Finn could connect to me somehow. Second order of magical business, get rid of this link so he can never use it against me again. Well, my dear, you found something remarkable, Mr. Echo said, sighing happily as he stared at the watch. As I stood close to him, a shiver danced through me. My gut clenched and told me to take the watch and run. I snatched the watch from the table and closed it in my fist. He turned and stared at me in surprise, and then a grin spread across his face. Oh, little girl, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. He straightened up, tall and proud, and plucked the glasses from his nose. Well, shit. I took a deep breath, the dull ache in my chest sizzling through me. It wasn't painful anymore, but if I didn't have to get in another fight, that would be better. If it's all the same to you, Mr. Echo, I'd like to leave now, I said. If you let me walk out the door without a fight, I promise I won't come back here and burn this place to the ground. He scoffed. You are nothing to me. A half-breed whelp with barely any magic. What are you going to do against me and my might? Is your might in the closet? Do you want me to wait for a moment while you dig it out? He blinked and then waved a hand. A door near the small office in the corner opened and 4 men ambled in. So, it's in the closet. That's handy. I sighed and put my hands on my hips, studying each of the goons. Hello, boys. Chapter 6. I surveyed the men as they surrounded me on 3 sides. I ambled backward to keep one shelf directly behind me. They focused their eyes on the watch tucked tight in my grip. I peered around the first goon to meet Mr. Echo's hard gaze. My threat stands. I'm going to come back here and burn your little shop to the ground. He didn't seem concerned. Yet another man underestimating my bloodthirst when it came to betraying me. You can try, young lady, but I must warn you I have anti-fire wards all over this place. Another fucking mage. Why did it turn out all the bad guys were mages? Couldn't a girl get one good guy mage to look up to? The men inched closer and I bumped into the shelf. It teetered slightly when I put my weight into it. Well, if he won't listen, I'll give you boys a chance to walk away without some broken bones, I said, making eye contact with each of them. Don't bother, Echo called from behind them. They only answered to me. I shook my head. Do you have a nasty villain mantra book back there you're drawing from? You're being cliché, and I honestly think you're better than that. He answered with a slightly demented smile. Do you have a plucky heroine mantra book at home on your nightstand? I couldn't stop the laugh that escaped. Nothing better than fighting a bad guy with banter. Touché. I should really work on my one-liners. They're getting stale. Take the watch. Kill her, Echo said from his safe position across the room. One guy charged forward. I dodged to the edge of the shelf and let him ram chest first into it. The shelf teetered and fell on him. It was so satisfying when the goons did exactly what I wanted them to do. Anchoring your furniture is important, Echo. Didn't you read the IKEA instruction manual? I backed into a narrow aisle so the guys could only come at me one at a time. I wouldn't survive if they came at me as a group. Another goon rushed forward. I lashed out with a punch to throw him back a few steps. So far none of them had used any magic. I didn't know if I was relieved, or if they were saving it for their big musical number at the end. The punched guy took another run at me. I crouched to sweep my leg under him. My ribs protested the movement, but so far I hadn't taken any hits there, so I'd say I was doing all right. He landed hard on the concrete, knees up, windshield wipering back and forth. 2 down, 2 to go. Did you use actual wood in this place or all concrete? The third goon took a running leap toward me. He was pretty fast, but I'd been practicing with a phi. I grabbed a nearby lamp and swung it at his head, connecting with the guy's skull and shattering the ceramic base. He went down fast. Wow, you guys aren't very quality. I'd get a refund on your might, Echo. The other goons had regained their feet, and I cast my gaze around for a weapon. The box conveniently labeled weapons sat on a shelf near Echo. If I made a move for it, I doubt I'd get it open before his goon squad got to me. My indecision got me a punch to the face. I licked a spot of blood from my lip and stared at the goon who'd hit me. I was trying to be nice by not making you all look like pussies in front of your boss, but now I'm tired of your shit. He threw another punch, which I blocked with my forearm before delivering my own solid hit to the side of his ear. With a hiss, he scrambled out of my reach again. Without a weapon, I couldn't end this fight properly, not alone. Keeping an eye on the goons, I sidestepped toward the shelf with a weapon box. The goons came at me from the front and behind again, but they had to maneuver around the shelves in the middle of the room. Every time they even brushed by a box, Echo made a distressing noise in his throat. Out of sheer curiosity, I delivered a powerful kick to the nearest box, sending it off the shelf to smash on the floor. Wood chips spilled out along with some sort of jewelry. Echo rushed forward, but one goon nudged him into the corner. Wonder what's in box number 2, I shouted and moved to kick the next box. One guy swooped under my thigh and took me down to the concrete floor. My head hit the ground hard enough to shoot stars through my vision. A boot hit my side and I screamed. Someone grabbed my hand to pry the watch loose from my grip. They weren't winning that easily. Especially with a sucker kick. I shoved the heel of my hand into the man's nose hard, sending him backward with a broken face. Blood poured from the wound and down the front of my hand. I scrambled to my feet, fire in my lungs with every breath. Anyone else want some? I yelled. 2 of the guys surged forward at once, the bloody one still a few feet away, nursing his face in his hands. They each grabbed a wrist and compressed the nerves at the base of my palm. Between breaths, the watch was there in my grip and then it was gone. Vanished. And no one took it away, so where the hell did it go? Yet another thing for me to figure out once I got out of here. I yanked my arm out of one of the guy's grasp and slammed the other guy's head into a shelf, sending it toppling over into another. Thing 1 and Thing 2 would have to come around to the other side to reach me now. From his corner, Echo called, "Where's the watch?" I punched the nearest goon in the neck and spun away from a kick that would have probably taken out the rest of the ribs on my injured side. I don't know. As you said, I'm a half-breed whelp with barely any magic. Sometimes shit just happens when I want it to. I was only a few feet away from the box labeled weapons. Just a little more. The goon with the bloody nose remained by Echo, who apparently was so powerful he needed a bodyguard from little ol' me. Flattering. Where do you get all your henchmen? I asked, sliding an inch at a time toward the weapons. I've been wondering that since this other mage I'm hunting always seems to have a never-ending supply. I figure if they're cheap I can pick up a few for my next fight. Will you just shut up and hand over the watch? One of the goons said. I chuckled. His statement was so like some of the things Hawk used to spout at me when we sparred. He thought my jabbering was annoying, but that was the point. Distracting myself enough so I could maneuver, distracting the opposition enough to get them angry so they make a stupid mistake. Hawk never made stupid moves but did often threaten me with duct tape if I didn't be quiet. One goon snuck in close enough to send another hit toward my ribs. I tried to block, but movement on that side had slowed down after the boot landing broke something. While I was doubled over trying to get my bearings, another goon swooped in and dragged me upright. They held me tight against the shelf. One pressed his hand around my throat. 2 held my arms, and the other backed Echo. Now, are we going to do this the easy way or the hard way? Echo said. Another perfect cliché, I said, despite the man compressing my windpipe. Echo stepped around some of the mess to stand in front of me. Search her pockets. Let's see if it's in there. One goon fished out my cell phone and tossed it away. An audible crunch made me wince. Damn. I really needed to put one of those protector cases on it. The guys at the phone store were going to ask questions if I kept having to buy a new phone every month. Another goon threw a pack of gum and a spare hair tie to the ground. Once they turned my jacket pockets out, they dug through the inside ones. One of them got a little too close to my nipple, and I tried to headbutt him in the face, but I couldn't with the other guy's tight grip on my neck. Anything? Echo demanded. They shook out my jacket but found nothing. I gave him a minute to process before wriggling in my hold. Cool. It's not here. I don't even know what I did with it. What's so important about it anyway? I tasted iron in the back of my throat. Blood in my lungs was never a good sign. Shit. I only had a little time to milk the information out of these guys. When I squirmed again, Echo waved off the main goon who held my head back. Thank you. You, my dear, had no idea what you were in possession of. Tell me, what mage did you steal it from? I must know. I tried to shrug with all the hands still on me. You probably don't know him. He runs in certain circles. Mr. Echo spluttered around half-formed protests. I used the heel of my boot to kick at the weapon box behind me. It barely moved. Whatever he'd loaded inside had to be too heavy. Shit. Echo stepped in closer, his face mottled and red. Tell me his name. Esteban, I think? At least that's what I've been calling him. Why? Do you know his real one? The Black Mage, Echo hissed and stumbled away from me. I gave him a smile. Oh, so you know him. Cool. Yeah, he and I keep meeting. Can't say I enjoy it, but I wonder what he'd think about you being in possession of the watch I stole from him. Do you think he's one of those guys who waits for explanations or just starts taking heads? By the fear that flashed across Echo's face, I assumed all magical people were just as terrified of him as everyone else, which made sense if he could steal anyone's powers he wanted. Why hadn't he taken mine yet? Oh right, because he wanted to use me as a breeding machine. The thought almost made me gag. Echo waved at the goons holding me. They dropped me, but they didn't look thrilled about it. Get out. Now. Get out of my shop. If he knows you stole his artifact, he can trace the signature. You'll lead him right to me. I coughed blood into my hand and sank to my knees. I'm gonna need a minute, fellas. Echo backed away and then took off, sprinting toward the front door of his shop. The goons stared between him and me, then finally followed him. One delivered another sharp kick to my face before walking out. I lay face down on the cold concrete and tried to breathe through the piercing pain in my chest. Any minute now, something would make one of my lungs collapse. With my vision swimming, I pressed up off the floor to sit. Upright, it hurt less to breathe, so I settled back against the shelf and focused on doing just that. Warm blood ran down my face, over my lips, but I'd broken my nose so many times I'd lost count. My thoughts drifted to Finn and the kiss I'd dragged him into. He'd kissed me back, and I wished I'd had the balls to stay, to let him keep kissing me and see where it went from there. Even if it happened only once, I wanted to know what it would feel like with him. Would he be gentle, or one of those lovers who demanded every pearl of pleasure they gave? I groaned. That wasn't going to get me moving. Who else could I think of that might give me some inspiration? Who'd yell at me until I got my ass up? The chief popped into my head next, and oh man, he would be so mad if he saw me now. He would rant and rave until spit flew from the hard line of his mouth, until I got to my feet and stumbled out of this shithole. I used that strength to pull myself up by the shelf, careful not to take in too deep a breath. It took a full minute to walk from one shelf to the next, using the merchandise to pick my way across each shelf. At the door I took a shallow breath and tried to push it open. A sharp pain sizzled up my side. Then, berating myself, I turned to put my back against the steel and used my hips and shoulders to shove the door open. The chill in the air slapped me hard, drying some of the blood on my lips. I pulled the hood under my leather jacket up to obscure my face, and used the brick wall of the building to make my way out to the sidewalk. I didn't have a car or a getaway plan in place. Hell, once the building ended, I didn't know if I would be able to walk on my own out of this shitty neighborhood without someone robbing me. I sank to the ground, my back to the corner of the bricks. Of course, all the people running around earlier were nowhere to be seen. I drew in a ragged breath, and it fucking hurt so much I whined through the end of it. Well, this wasn't the way I wanted to die. Especially since my to-do list had gotten so long. Punch Finn was right up there at the top of it. Finn. I closed my eyes and tried to slow my breathing. Then I focused on the bond between us. Staying conscious was quickly becoming the biggest problem. The second I passed out, the wolves that lay low around this dodgy end of town would descend, and who knew what would happen to me then. I didn't trust Echo not to return and finish the job he'd started. Or at the very least, one of his goons. Stay awake, Zoey, I whispered to myself. But it was useless. Darkness closed in around me and I let go of the pain. Chapter 7. Next time I died, I would do it somewhere warmer. The concrete under my legs sent a chill through me and I shook head to toe. Even my teeth chattered. I popped open an eye to stare up at the cloudy sky. Little white puffs dotted the blue expanse here and there. Something in my chest tightened and it wasn't in my ribs. Finn was before me with his sparkling eyes and the way he seemed to never care about his hair, and yet it did exactly what he wanted it to. Finn. I touched the bond between us again. It felt taut, like a length of bubble gum threatening to snap at any moment. It vibrated as my vision dimmed. Then warm hands cupped my cheeks and tilted my head back to lean into the brick. Zoey. I refused to cry in front of him, so I kept my lips together and my eyes on his clean-shaven chin. A light slap on my cheek dragged my surroundings into focus. Zoey, look at me, please. Don't make me use my power on you. I know you're mad enough at me already. Did you just slap me? I asked, the words tilting and tumbling over one another. He let out a shaking exhale and gently lifted me into his arms. Every step he took vibrated through me and sent pain arching along my ribs. I whimpered and hated myself for it. A warm heat built in my chest as he climbed into the back seat of the vehicle and lay me across his lap, supporting my upper body against his arm. Finn. How did he find me so quickly? I didn't call for him, but I couldn't say I didn't want him there. Not if he'd saved my life yet again. He tucked me into him tighter. Stay awake for me, Zoey. I need to use my magic when it returns, but you're making it very difficult. I protested, but he shushed me. No, save your energy. You took what you could from me to stay alive, but then I used everything else to reach you in time. We'll be with the doctors soon. His voice reminded me of chocolate-covered strawberries as it vibrated against my body through his chest. I wanted to lick his chin and see if he tasted that way too. So I did. I leaned up toward his face and gave his chin a long lick, loving the salty texture on my tongue. He gave a strangled groan. Not the time. Relax. Focus on breathing steady and shallow. Something else slipped in under the haze of lust washing over me. Heat. Fury-laced heat. I tilted my head enough to survey the car. The captain sat in the driver's seat with a white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel. I almost smiled to see him. She's happy to see you, Finn told him. I dragged my gaze back up to Finn's face. How did you know what I was thinking? The words again came out slurred together and hoarse. He didn't answer, only tightened his jaw and stared out the windshield. The anger still washed over me and it warmed me from the inside out. If it would stop the tremors sweeping through me every so often, I didn't care. Then realization broke through my haze. The anger I felt came from Finn. Why are you so mad at me? I whined, unable to keep things from just falling out of my face in my current condition. Because you're fucking dying. Didn't you realize that? A curl of blood dripped down the side of my mouth and Finn swiped at it with the sleeve of his jacket. I noticed, actually, I choked out. Drive faster, Finn yelled toward the front seat as he studied my face. I shoved at his chest, but it was barely a pat of my hands against the solid wall of him. Don't. 2 days ago, you would have cut out his heart and eaten it in front of him. Now you're getting upset when I yell at him? Confusion broke through the anger beating down on me. It was cooler against my skin, like rubbing menthol on my chest when I had a flu. That feels good, I murmured and closed my eyes. Another slap dragged me back to the light again. Do that again and I'll take your hand off, I said. Prove it, he hissed in my face. You're so big and bad, sit up and take this hand. Come on. Just keep your eyes open, and I won't call you on your shit again. So many words, I said, instead of the fuck you I tried to fish out of my brain and throw at him. I blinked up from my vantage point below his chin. His hair had little strands of gold woven through it, little strips to break up the honey brown. They sparkled in the sunlight streaming in from the back windows. I reached out and rubbed a piece between my fingers to see if it felt as silky soft as it looked. Of course it was. Like my favorite mink blanket I stole from Hawk years ago. Soft, I whispered, which didn't hurt as much. Finally, something I could manage to say out loud. I tucked my hands up against his chest and shoved at him. The watch pressed between us and he glanced down to catch it before I dropped it on my hip. His eyes grew more round as he surveyed the watch. Where did you get this? I closed his fingers around it. Protect it. His gaze shot to mine and I stared back, waiting for him to agree. If I died, at the very least, I didn't want Esteban to get his hands on the watch again. Not when I'd died to keep it from another thief. It obviously did something powerful. Something I'd hoped to figure out. If anyone could solve the mystery, Finn would. A ragged cough escaped my chest and I clutched at him again. The captain reached back and sat his fingers on my shoulder. The weight of his hand felt like it tipped me to the side so much I might topple off Finn's lap. Warmth trickled through me. Not Finn's raging fury but something softer, kinder, more annoyed perturbance. I laughed and both men glanced at me. When the captain removed his hand, Finn pulled me back into his chest, resettling me there. I gave her what I could, the captain said. I have to keep some back in case they track her to us once we get to the house. Finn hugged me tighter until I winced. Carefully, he released me, but only enough so he didn't hurt me. I wish you were screaming at me right now, he said, his voice rough. I want to hear how many times you can fit the word fuck in one sentence. And you can yell at the captain too. Just wake up, stay with us, and you can be as belligerent and unpleasant as you want. I coughed. Such a gentleman. We're taking you back to my house. Why didn't you touch our bond sooner? I blinked rapidly so that the heat that was building in my eyes didn't spill over into something embarrassing like tears. You don't trust me. Who the hell said I don't trust you? Magic, was all that came out of the tirade building in my mind about my magical abilities and all the things he'd been keeping from me. Magic, he whispered, his brow furrowed. What about magic? No, don't answer that. We can discuss it once you're stabilized. Save your strength and stop fucking talking to me. Stop asking questions then, I grumbled, a little louder than I spoke before. It still hurt, but I managed it without spitting blood down my face again. His lips tipped up in a small smile, part relief, part humor. The kiss rushed back to me, the way his mouth felt against mine, the taste of him on my tongue. As I thought about it, his face shifted to something else. Almost needy. Not now, Zoey, he whispered so softly he barely made the sounds with those beautiful lips. I tugged his face close to mine, intending to close the distance to make speaking easier, but staring into his eyes proved more of a distraction than I could handle. You're pretty, somehow popped out of my mouth, and any blood not currently filling my lungs rushed into my face. Once he saved my life again, I would need to flee the country to get away from the shame and embarrassment. Settle down, love, he said. We'll be there soon. Once you're healed again, we'll finish this conversation. An image of him cupping my neck and running his thumb under my chin to my bottom lip flashed in my mind. I gasped and blinked it away. Did he really do that? Or had he just put an image in my mind? He met my eyes, a satisfied smile twisting his lips. He had some explaining to do about this, especially since I'd repeatedly told him I didn't want him in my head. What's happening? I asked. With a long-suffering sigh, he hugged me close. This is your fault. When you pulled on the bond as you were passing out, you threw your power at it. The reverberation of that magic hitting my mental walls and bouncing back against yours shredded them both. We are completely open to each other. At least until we can settle them back in place. But right now, you need to focus on healing. I promise to never speak a word of what I see or hear. I blinked and touched the bond. It felt taut like it did earlier, but now bigger, closer, wider. As if we'd shortened the distance between us, and only a few feet separated us now. I tried to crawl along its length, wanting to get a look inside this mysterious man's head while I had the chance. I'm only allowing this since you'll likely forget it once we get you on a gurney. Flashes, images, words, everything washed into my mind, rushing in and out like a montage. So many of them were of me, lying on the concrete outside Echo's shop. Another flew by, which showed the watch he still held in his hand. Even more pieces were emotionally charged. How he felt to find me dying. How he felt to be holding me in his arms without my cursing at him. How he felt when I wanted to see what he thought. I pulled back to give us enough space and him whatever privacy I could. Not one single image showed his lack of trust. Almost all of them showed something else, something even stranger. Something almost like love. That was impossible. Pie princes did not fall in love with mixed-breed bounty hunters who couldn't even control their magic. He touched my cheek, dragging my attention back to his face. He said nothing, but then he didn't need to, not when I could feel how he was feeling. The relief was so tangible it forced a sigh from me. Sensing I'd had enough emotional bombardment, Finn held up the watch. Will you tell me about this? What happened at the store? I caught a bit from your memory when I picked you up, but I tried to be careful since I know you're still angry at me for crossing your boundaries. His description made it seem like he'd mixed my colors and my whites in the washing machine. I blinked and touched his face, shoving the memories of him forcing me to stay against my will into his head. When the image ran out, he blinked down at me. A sheen of tears rimmed his eyes, causing the blue glow to intensify. We'll talk about that too when you're stabilized. Not so bad, I whispered, but then another bloody cough ripped through me. I won't make you tell me about it now, but hopefully you can tell me about it later. It's a powerful artifact, and it should be kept somewhere safe. Especially if you snagged it where I think you did. The captain said something from the front seat, which I didn't catch in my mooning over Finn. Damn. Would South America be far enough, or maybe Australia? At least I wouldn't have to learn another language in my exile of shame. You're not going anywhere, he whispered into my hair and shifted me again in his embrace. The car skidded to a stop and the captain hopped out, the SUV rocking from his exit. He ripped open Finn's door and scooped me out of Finn's arms. The chill set back in, making my knees shake as the captain sprinted with me toward the front door of Finn's house. I watched the captain's chin and sighed. He glanced down and said, "If you lick me, I'll never let you live it down. I'll remind you about it every single day until you or I die." I laughed and coughed at the same time. Once we reached the inside of Finn's mansion, he settled me on a waiting gurney with a stone-faced nurse standing by to push me away. I tried to sit up so I could see him or Finn, but several hands pressed me down into the white sheets. A needle cut into my arm and another cold chill washed over me. Cold. The nurse patted my shoulder. I know, honey, it's just the IV fluids. Relax, once we get you into the operating room, we'll make sure you stay warm. Since when did Finn have his own operating room? Or medical team this large? Maybe the captain's injury had facilitated it. It wasn't as if he didn't have the money to keep an entire hospital staff stocked in his mansion. I watched the gilded ceiling shift to more practical white sheetrock until they pushed me into a brightly lit room. Once the gurney stopped, several pairs of hands worked to cut off my clothing. I groaned. I like this leather jacket. Someone chuckled from outside my vision, which was consumed by the bright overhead spotlight above my face. When I was left naked and chattering, they covered me with a hospital gown and did some magic with the IV fluids. It'll warm up in a moment, the nurse said again, this time closer to my ear. The fluids were making their way through my system. I couldn't feel my fingers or toes anymore. Even the ache in my chest had eased, but I didn't dare draw a full breath. Settle back, the nurse said. We need to get this tube in you once you fall asleep. Don't worry. I'll be here when you wake up. Her round face lulled me off. I grasped onto the bond between me and Finn at the last second, but then it slipped out of my hands and I fell back into the dark. Alone. Chapter 8. The sound of raised voices broke through the haze in my brain, pulling me from the darkness to pain-shrouded light. I groaned and tried to sit up, only for two pairs of hands to ease me back down again. It took several blinks to clear the blur in my vision. The captain's chiseled jawline and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow swam into focus. Don't get up. You need to stay calm and rest. I was calmly sleeping until you two arguing woke me up. Thanks for that. It's a great way to come out of a coma. Speaking of which, did you guys scare off my nurse? The captain gestured at Finn, who I could only now see clearly on my other side, speaking too fast for me to catch. Then he lowered his face too close. I shoved him back a bit. "Your nurse left with the doctors," he said. "They are always on call though. Once they fixed your ribs and lungs, we've been working on the major healing. You should be up and around by tonight." I ran my hand down my side, my naked side, save for a thick wrap like an elastic bandage running from my breast to my belly button. Can someone get me some clothes please?" I asked. Heat washed into my cheeks and I glared at the two men. Why would they think I would be fine laid out between them mostly naked? At least I still wore panties. Finn grabbed a thick oatmeal-hued wool blanket from the foot of my bed and lay it over me. "Thank you," I said, but I didn't meet his eyes. The memories from the car ride had stumbled back into my head, and the blush that started at being nude only heated my cheeks further at the memory of me trying to lick his face. "Sorry about that," the captain said. "We just needed to access your skin to help with your healing now that your lungs have been repaired. No one looked at anything that wasn't completely necessary." My mouth tasted like sandpaper and blood. Not a delightful combination. "Can I have some water, please?" The captain pressed a water bottle into my hand while Finn loomed over my right side. "What the hell were you thinking?" I rolled my eyes. "Is it time for Daddy's lecture now? Last I checked, you have no say in what I do or don't do." Finn frowned at me. "Well, maybe I should have a say in it, if you're going to drain your magic and mine when you make these choices for yourself." I sighed and a shot of pain flashed through me. "Look, whatever magic you did or didn't use is your business. I was just taking a minute to get my bearings before you came along." "That's such fucking bullshit, Zoey, and you know it." A loud shatter somewhere behind me made me jump as Finn stalked away. "You were dying," he said. I felt it. "Without my magic, the magic you grabbed through the bond and stole to save yourself, you would have died against a dingy brick building. And on that side of town, I doubt anyone would have noticed for a couple of days." Something like guilt wiggled into my chest, applying pressure. I didn't want to admit he was right. Nor did I want to give him credit for saving me, despite it being the truth. I still remembered the kiss. The anger over the last time I was injured. And his betrayal. I hadn't forgotten a single reason I didn't want to be here in the first place. The captain swung around the end of my hospital bed and grabbed Finn by the upper arms. He whispered something to him which made Finn almost deflate, and then both men turned to me. "How are you feeling?" the captain asked. I took a second to evaluate my condition. Pain everywhere, but nothing like it had been before. My face ached, no doubt from that goon's last kick. My chest hurt the most of all. "I think I'm doing all right," I said. "Everything still hurts, but I don't think I'm in danger anymore. I probably just need to rest a bit. But I can go home for that." The captain shook his head. "Sorry, but the doctor said you need to stay flat like this, at least until your lungs are healed. If you sit up or move too much, it might rip something open." The word rip made me clench up. Well then, I guess I'm staying right here for the time being. I lifted the water to my mouth but only dribbled it down my face. Finn huffed and slipped his hand under my neck to level me up enough to allow me to drink. "Thank you," I wheezed out when he eased me back down. "So, anything else happen while I was out?" "Please don't bring up the licking. Please don't bring up the licking." The captain adjusted the blanket on his side to straighten the edges. "Do you want to tell us about the watch you brought with you?" The watch. I'd completely forgotten about it. I clashed gazes with Finn, who clenched his jaw tight as he stared down at me. "You still have it, right?" I asked. He nodded, dug into his jeans pocket and pulled it out. "I kept it safe, as I promised. But I never promised we wouldn't discuss it." "I get that, but can we wait until I'm upright again? I hate people hovering over me throwing accusations. I'm sure they are coming any moment." Finn narrowed his eyes and tucked the watch away inside his pocket. Clearly, he wasn't returning it until we had that discussion then. I yawned and my eyes grew heavy. Finn and the captain argued over my head as I drifted again, but I couldn't hear the words well enough. It was later in the day when I woke. Light streamed differently through the windows to my right. Finn sat in an armchair, a book spread open over his crossed leg. An enormous book, but I couldn't see the title from the angle I lay. When I peered around, the captain was nowhere to be seen, only a toy soldier guard at the doorway facing out into the hall. My stomach let out a loud rumble. "Can I have some food or something?" Finn snapped the book closed and surveyed me. "Of course. I'll help you eat. You still need to stay as flat as possible." "Until when?" He shrugged and crossed the room to a table with a covered tray. When he returned carrying a small plate, the scent of roasted vegetables caused another rumble through my empty belly. With a chuckle, he sat the plate on the bed beside me and grabbed a pillow to prop up my head. Then he carefully fed me spoonfuls of chicken and vegetables. Everything was warm and perfectly seasoned, Holly's creations always were. I managed several bites, careful not to crunch my abs up as he fed the steel utensil between my lips. There was a certain intimacy about Finn feeding me, which I wouldn't have thought would happen. Yet another moment of agony to add on top of all the rest between us. These brilliant shining moments I only got for seconds, minutes even. Moments I would have to take with me when I left and remember with a painful ache in the future. When a wave of nausea surged up, I shook my head at another bite. He returned the plate to the tray and removed the pillow. "Get some more rest. We'll check your injuries soon, see how they are progressing. My magic is almost returned. I'll be able to use it again to speed things along." I blinked up at him, the daylight crowning his golden head, and then let sleep claim me once again. Next time I woke, the light in the room had been replaced with lamps and a warm fire somewhere across the room from my head. It felt nice, but not as nice as the soft press of something against my ankle. I blinked through grit and rubbed my eyes. At the foot of the bed, Finn swiped a washcloth up my ankle to the side of my knee. A cold tingle followed as he repeated the process on the other side. I held my breath, trying not to move, dueling emotions blooming in my chest. I hated him, right? Then why did this feel so damn good? "I know you're awake," he said. "You have dirt from one end of you to the other, which was strange considering you were clothed when we found you." Dirt. I tried to think back to the sidewalk. Me laying against the wall on the brink of death. The tingle of magic in the air. That had been Finn's magic, not mine. The other mage himself said I barely had any magic. "Phi sometimes borrow the energy from natural sources when we need to augment our powers," he said. "I think you used the earth below you when you were sitting on the ground to keep yourself alive." Shit. More magic I performed with little forethought or explanation on how I accomplished it. I don't know what I did. As you're aware, I have little control over any of this. He swiped the cloth up, cleaning the dirt from around my knees and inner thighs. I should tell him to stop, bat his hands away, especially if he brought them any higher under the blanket. But I couldn't manage the words to ask him to stop touching me. His eyes were lidded, and his expression remained calm and detached as he finished cleaning my legs, carefully not looking under the blanket as he did so. Then he moved to my arms and my chest around the bandages. Some savage part of me didn't want him calm and collected while he washed my skin so gently. I wanted to see something in his face that matched the inferno building inside me with every pass of his hands. "Calm yourself," he whispered, turning away to brace his hands around the table holding the water bowl. "Calm yourself or I won't be able to stay calm." "So we're still connected then?" He let out a sound between a huff and a snort. "We are. I've been unable to repair either of our mental walls. The rest of the world is shut out, but you and I are stuck inside each other's heads for a while, it seems." Oh. That was going to make things interesting between us. I'd gone off on him for controlling my mind for a few moments. Now we had direct access into each other's emotions and thoughts. Fucking hell. Oh, indeed. He dropped the rag into the bowl and dried me off briskly with a nearby towel. After securing the blanket around me again, he helped me drink a few mouthfuls of water, his gaze burning into mine as I sipped. The fragments of what happened in the car had already come back to me, but I'd been in and out through the pain. Now, with a much lower pain level, the full force of his emotions pressed around me. They were like standing in the center of a hurricane. Yet his face showed nothing. Not even the tiniest hint of the chaos inside. "My apologies, I'm not quite in control of things yet," he said. My mouth opened and closed like a fish. "It's fine. I'm sorry I'm not helping. Can you read my mind?" I kept our eyes locked as I asked it inside my head. A small smile curled at the corner of his mouth. "I can't read your mind, but I can read your emotions, and knowing you, it helps fill in some of the blanks." I dragged my gaze from his and closed my eyes. Looked like today might be the day I take up meditation. There were things in my head I definitely didn't want him to hear or feel. The captain charged into the room. I glanced at him from the corner of my eye until he stood over me, peering down at me, scanning my body as if I might have gained more injuries while he'd been gone. "I'm fine," I said, trying to reassure him. A fresh scar marked his chin, almost like a starburst right where his neck and face met. Once the bandages were removed, I wondered if I'd have a scar from the surgery they performed. The captain braced his hands on the side of my bed but didn't apply pressure. "How are you feeling?" "Like some bargain bin henchman used me for a punching bag." "How are you feeling?" He chuckled, his mouth turning in a sort of half-smile. "How did you encounter these disreputable henchmen?" I risked a glance at Finn when I answered. "It was about that watch, actually. I wanted to see what I could learn about it, but the man who I thought would answer my questions really just wanted to steal it." The captain nodded. "Yeah, that happens when you play with magical forces you don't understand, kid." "Kid? We're going there, really?" I would have rolled my eyes but didn't have the willpower. "Well, son, if someone took the time to explain the aforementioned magical forces to me, then maybe I wouldn't have gotten myself flattened by a goon squad." He gave me another wry smile and jerked back my blanket. A chill washed over me. "Hey. Not cool. Let's try to sit you up, see how the damage looks and if we can heal you some more." "Oh, in that case." I let him grasp my hand and lever me to sitting in the bed. A wave of darkness swam across my vision until I blinked it away. "Lightheaded," I told them. Finn pressed into my back for support, his shirt whispering over my bare skin. "Does anything hurt?" the captain asked, molding his grip around my ribcage. Finn lay his hands on top of my shoulders, warm and heavy. I marveled at the difference between their touches. The captain's grip felt perfunctory, assessing. Like a doctor's, or in his case, a battlefield medic. Finn's touch felt possessive, and almost inappropriate for the seemingly innocent touch. I focused on the question I'd been asked. "No, nothing hurts when you press. It's more inside, like an ache when I breathe." The captain nodded and closed his eyes. A tingle of magic surged around the three of us, and I felt that pull between Finn and me light up and flow between us like a conveyor belt, one end over the other, returning after each pass. When the swell died down, I tested an inhale. "Oh yeah, that's much better, thank you." The captain smiled at me and stepped away to grab a bundle from the table. "Some clothes and weapons I thought you might want." I didn't even bother quelling my answering smile. "Have I told you today what a fine human being you are?" "Thank you." Finn stepped up to stand beside the table, glaring between us. "I don't know why you're bothering. The second she's on her feet, she'll run off again." Chapter 9. Run off again. A sharp pain shot up my side and into my neck, sending me sideways to lay back down to ease it. "I don't think so." The captain shot Finn a look. "Calm down." Then he watched me with a furrowed brow. "Guess you're on bed rest a bit longer." "Don't worry, it shouldn't be more than another day or so." I pouted through my heavy exhale. The movement took so much out of me. "Why are you up and walking around after being shot, and I only break some ribs and I'm laid out for 2 days?" "Maybe because you're a half-breed mutant," he said, "and neither of us know the extent of your powers, so we err on the side of caution and heal you in increments until you're capable of throwing punches again. Also, I should add, you had a punctured lung and several broken ribs. You were a few minutes away from dying when we found you." I swiveled my hips to the side in order to square myself on the bed while Finn draped the blanket over my body. "Figures. You've probably been waiting all day to rub that in my face." His answering grin made me want to test out my punching abilities on his head. Finn pressed my arm to the bed. "Save it for later." The captain gave us both a little smirk and wandered toward the door. "Play nice, you two." "I take it back. He's an evil, evil man." I glanced up at Finn, who wore a scowl as he stared down at me. "What is your problem?" "I'm lying down." He shook his head in disgust. Anger rolled over me and through me in the same way it had in the car. Before, I couldn't even get a glimpse of his emotions, and now I was subjected to them constantly. I closed my eyes. "How long until you can fix these wall thingies? Because if you're going to blast anger at me every minute, I'm about to do the same to you. See which of us is the emotional one." A snort of annoyance came from over my shoulder. Now was probably a bad time to ask for more food. My stomach let out a loud growl, and I couldn't stop the chuckle that bubbled up to follow it. Finn crossed the room to get a plate from under a tray and brought it back to the bed. I locked eyes with him over the end of the fork. A sort of falling sensation washed through me, and I felt everything down our bond. His pride at being able to take care of me. Anger shimmering under the surface as if he was holding it back, waiting for the right moment to unleash it. I swallowed the food, but it stuck in my throat, making me gulp to get it down. Finn's emotions weren't simple things to bear. He brought another bite to my lips, but I shook my head. "I'm sorry, please let me do it. You aren't doing a terrible job or anything, but I can't focus on eating when you're throwing emotional softballs at my face." He blinked and went rigid. "What do you mean by that? I can feel everything wafting off you through this stupid bond. It's like you're pelting me with every emotional disturbance popping into your head." He stepped back and crossed the room. The onslaught ebbed and I could breathe again when he wasn't so close. I could get my own thoughts instead of his pounding into me. "Is that better?" he called. I gave him a thumbs up and took the plate to scoop more food into my mouth. Once I had more than I could take, I sat the plate beside me on the bed and removed the pillow from under my neck. "How long do I have to lay here again?" Finn's voice came from the chair behind my head, which surprised me since I didn't notice him cross back over to it. "Until it no longer pains you to move around on your own. It shouldn't be much longer." The emotions he'd been battering me with had subsided, and I stared up at the ceiling, wondering how to fill the awkward silence that grew between us. Did he feel the same emotions from me? I hoped not. My mind was my own, and when someone else breached it, I felt vulnerable in a way I wasn't comfortable with. Especially with Finn, given the plethora of feelings I harbored toward him. I couldn't truly say I hated him. It wasn't that simple. Nor could I say I loved him either, which made things infinitely more complicated. I clutched the blanket to my chest and tried to let my thoughts go so I could rest. "How about I tell you a story?" he suggested. "Maybe it will help you sleep." "Is it dirty?" I asked. He snorted but ignored me. There was once a young Fae princess. She was betrothed to a man in a neighboring country, a human man who wielded magic. I sucked in a breath. Was he a mage? Is this a true story? "Will you shut up and listen?" he said, but there was amusement in his tone. On the day of the wedding, the Fae princess rode across her country to meet with a human prince who somehow had magic. But along the way, men attacked her. These humans dragged her from her horse, held her down, and did terrible things to her. This is supposed to be a soothing story? Again, he ignored me. The princess fought with everything she had. She fought so hard she sucked what minor magic the humans had out of them, taking it into herself, thereby killing them. From that moment it changed her. She was no longer a Fae princess, but something darker and more dangerous. She rode to the prince's palace, and when she arrived, people turned out to meet her and cheer her wedding. No one noticed the darkness now lurking inside her. When she met the fair prince, she stole his magic too, swallowing it down into the black hole her soul had become. It took countless humans to subdue and finally kill her. When he stopped, I let out a long-held breath. Is that it? She serves as a warning to Fae on why we can never lose control of our power or our emotions. He was telling me something with this twisted little bedtime story. Something he wanted desperately for me to understand. I'd missed the point because I was so immersed in the sadness of his voice as he spoke each word. If I were half Fae and half mage, what did it mean for my emotional control? I'd lost myself to a good rage plenty of times, and I'd never sucked the life out of anyone. Nor their magic, I assumed. I glanced around the room, wishing I could see his face right now. His anger still felt present, but muted, as if he'd tucked it away for the night, content on the bit he'd unleashed already. Then a familiar ache started in my belly, and I realized I hadn't gone to the bathroom all day. My relationship with Finn was not ready for a moment like this. Yet now that I acknowledged my need to pee, the need grew stronger. I cleared my throat and sighed. "Can you help me go to the restroom?" Something surged through the bond, but I couldn't identify it before he reeled it back into himself. I needed more practice with this thing. He cupped my elbow and slipped his arm around my body. Once he had me seated, he grabbed a robe off a nearby chair and draped it around my shoulders. I cast off the blanket and tied the belt loose and low around my hips. Expecting him to ease me off the bed so I could walk, I braced my arms on the table. Instead, he scooped me up against his chest, leaving me to flap my hands up around his neck for balance. A tingle of pain shot down my sides but quickly disappeared. He carried me to the restroom, and as he eased me down to standing, my face burned hotter and brighter. I can manage this part. Like he didn't believe me, he lingered. I waved my hands at him to shoo. I'll call you back when I need help, I promise. Thankfully, he walked out without a fight. I heard him settle against the door while I finished my business and leaned over the sink to wash my hands. Once presentable, I called out for him. Finn, you can come in now. He swung open the door, surveying me, the room, the floor. What did he expect? Me to die flopped over on the john? I took a step forward, but he scooped me up again. When we got back to the makeshift hospital room, he deposited me on the bed slowly, as though he were reluctant to let me go. His fingers left warm imprints on the bare flesh of my legs. Despite the toweling wash he'd given me earlier, I still felt gritty, and I hated it, with him looking so immaculate in his gray t-shirt and jeans. Even with his bare feet, which I had never seen before. I obviously hadn't had sex in way too long. Well, technically I'd never had sex, but it had been a long time since I'd fooled around or even had an orgasm. It was the only reason for the sheer need rolling over me as he touched me, with not even a hint of impropriety. I'm going to remove the bandage here and replace it with a clean one. His tone was bland neutral. He grasped my wrist and levered up my arms. Then he unwound the gauzy cloth around my breasts, all the while staring directly into my eyes. When did replacing a bandage become practically erotic? I shuddered out of breath and shook my head, embarrassment setting in. Sorry for breathing in your face. I was panting, but who was counting? It's fine, he said. I was left topless with my arms up while he fetched a new bandage across the room. He barely spared my breasts a glance before winding the cloth around me again. Disappointment swamped me, but what did I expect? Him to ogle me while I was injured. Would I have done the same to him? I was embarrassed to admit to myself, maybe I would. When he finished, he washed my arms, rubbing my skin briskly until I was clean and glowing in the low light of the room. Then he leaned in, cupped the back of my neck, and lay me down like a dip during a dance. After his hands were gone, I swallowed wave after wave of something bitter grating in my senses. It took me way too long to realize it originated from the bond between us. He was disappointed. In me. The thought shot a bolt of pain into my heart. Then he came back to the side of the bed, grabbed my chin hard in his hand, and forced my gaze to his. Something peeled away inside me, and it was there. The bond was a breathing thing between us. He was disappointed he couldn't touch me more, touch me harder, feel my body beneath his. On the heels of that revelation, heat and need flared into me, so strong and powerful I clenched my thighs together, and all I could do was breathe through the intense pleasure. I grabbed his wrist, squeezing, as the lust and need gave way to anger and seething fury at seeing me hurt, at me not listening to him, at my inability to accept help from anyone no matter what it cost me. Tears poured down my cheeks and he released me, leaving me undone on the bed. He used the corner of the towel to wash the wet from my face, gave me a few sips of cold water, and then resumed his seat behind my head. I was left with the residual emotions, both what he showed me and my own. It took me ages to bring my breathing under control. Once I did, I slipped into a doze, Finn's face swimming above me, his crystal-shot eyes glowing in the dark. Chapter 10. When I woke, sunlight streamed in from the windows. I took a deep breath and smiled through the pain-free exhale. I lifted my chin to peer over the edge of the bed, but the chair behind me sat empty. Finn must have left in the night, hopefully to get some rest. He tended me for the last 2 days. Risking both men yelling at me when they found out, I pulled myself up to sitting, focusing on using my arm muscles and not my stomach. Once upright, I let my dizziness settle and then slid off the edge of the bed, placing one foot on the warm hardwood first, then the other. With a little sigh, I shoved away from the bed the tiniest bit. No floundering, no weakness. Shit, I actually felt kind of good. I grabbed the clothes on the table, stripped off my dirty underwear, and put on the fresh clothes. The shirt felt too soft, too rich for my blood. The black leggings stretched over my body as if they were made for me alone. Maybe I should let these boys clothes shop for me more often. I tended to buy cheap cotton t-shirts because it hurt my wallet less when my targets ripped them or bled on them. Once I was dressed, I grabbed a bottle of water from the bedside table beside me and drank it. It would take me time to build up my strength. That was always the worst part of being injured for me, the time I spent down while the rest of the world continued on without me. Once I drank half the bottle, I settled onto the floor and moved through some of the physical therapy stretches I'd learned over the years, careful to stop any time I felt a twinge in my muscles. The door opened behind me and I continued the stretch, resituating my hands as I grabbed my feet at the end of my outstretched legs. Finn glared at me. I didn't even need to look at him to feel it. The bond seemed to be in place this morning too. Yay. What the hell are you doing? He asked. Contemplating my place in the universe and how we are all small cogs in a very large machine, I said, glancing up at him from beside my elbow. His hands were anchored on his hips. Today he wore a white button-down untucked over black jeans. His feet were bare, and I marveled at seeing his toes all over again. Still staring at his feet, I smiled. Did you spend days on end wearing shoes for my benefit? Because I promise, you lose none of your mystique even with your toes showing. He wiggled them and I did a quick scan up his body. Somehow, I'd become so much more aware of every inch of him. Probably not a good thing when he glowered at me like I'd stolen the last piece of bacon. You should be in bed, he said. I twisted slightly to stretch the other side of my ribs. Nothing pulled or ached. I'm feeling fine and I've been moving slowly. I promise. He crouched beside me, still wearing the same put-out expression. You could have at least waited for me or the captain to check before you decided for yourself. Sitting back, I released the stretch and shook my head. If you want me in your life, you're going to have to learn that I do things myself, or not at all. He thrust out his hand and hauled me to my feet. And if you want me in your life, you're going to have to learn to ask for help when you need it, and not barrel through every situation like a child. I blinked at him, tasting his anger and his hurt feelings in the air. How did he really feel about me? I'll let you check me over now if that will make you feel better, I said. Also, why is the floor so warm? He tugged me into a chair and crouched down in front of me without answering. When he molded his hands to the outside of my ribcage, an onslaught of emotions pummeled me straight through the bond. I gritted my teeth and shoved the emotions away, focusing on breathing. Can you shut that off for a minute? I can't think. He tilted his head as if he might lay his cheek on my lap while he gently squeezed and prodded my belly and ribs. I think everything is fine. You should still be careful for a couple days and don't get into any more fistfights. And the floor has warmers. I nodded, watching him warily, waiting for another emotional maelstrom. When he removed his hands, the feelings ebbed and I sat back with a sigh. My stomach grumbled and I braced to stand up, but he waved me back down and shifted to sit on the floor. He stared up at me and said, No breakfast until you tell me what the hell happened the other day. From the beginning. And don't leave anything out this time. After everything he'd done to save my life, he deserved the truth. And with all we'd shared in the past couple of days, I found I didn't want to keep it from him. Well, I went to that shop to find out about the watch I gave you. I held up my hand. Before I continue, I need you to promise not to freak out. Just listen, and then you can have a meltdown afterward. His gaze sharpened, but he gave me a single nod. I rushed through the next part. I stole the watch from Esteban when we were fighting him. He shifted as if he wanted to speak, and I pressed my fingers over his mouth. No, let me finish. I was going to tell you about it when we got back to the house and everything settled down, but then you pulled the mind control thing and I freaked out and left. I admit probably not one of my best moves, but you were an ass as well. He blinked rapidly and I covered his whole mouth with my palm. The next day, I tried to find out about the watch but didn't get anywhere with an old client who deals with antiques and jewelry. He referred me to Echo, the man I met where you found me. Unfortunately, I ignored my gut instinct and let him look at the watch. Then he tried to steal it. He brought out some thugs with muscles and tried to beat me into giving it to him. When I threatened him, saying Esteban would probably come after whomever possessed it, he got spooked and they all ran away. Then I crawled out of the building and that's when you found me. The end. Finn gently pulled my hand from his face, his eyes angry, his jaw set hard. Are you sure you're finished? I nodded, and tugged my hand from his before he did whatever and I got blasted through the bond again. First, let me ask, what in the hell were you thinking? Why would you ignore your instincts like that? I know you're one of those people who know how valuable that gut reaction can be in a crisis situation, and yet you ignored it and stayed because of what? I shrugged, shame swamping me. To get information about the watch. To find Esteban. To finally get justice. Finn huffed and shook his head. You were going to do this all on your own, right? Take him down by yourself because we've been super successful as a group so far? And yet you thought you could match him? Who do you think you are that you seem to feel your rage is bigger, your revenge more deserving of vengeance? The quiet of the room settled between us. His sharp words cut deep. Shame and embarrassment warred in my chest in a sickly current. I won't apologize for being who I am, I whispered, but I will say thank you for saving my life. And I'll add, I guess we aren't so different because it's the exact same thing that happened before when you went off on your own. His anger hit me in a flash, shoving me back into the chair with the staggering weight of it. He heaved himself off the floor and anchored his hands on the sides of the chair to press his face in close to mine. His breath smelled of peppermint and coriander, a strange combination that turned my stomach upside down and sent my heart pounding against my chest. I swallowed heavily, and the sound reverberated between us. What do you want me to say? He leaned in closer, and past the anger I felt a sharp desperation for me to understand. To understand and feel what he did. I reached out to touch his cheeks, and in that moment my feelings and his coalesced into an inferno that settled around us like a blanket. I sucked in a breath and clamped my lips shut so I didn't say or do anything stupid. He leaned in further, his mouth millimeters from my own. I stared into his eyes, trying to focus through the heat of our combined pent-up resistance to each other. He spoke first, whispering against my lips. Do you understand what would have happened if you died? Slowly he closed his eyes but stayed hovering in front of me. His next words threatened to break me. I would have burned the world down. Raised it to ashes to bring you back to me. I would have risked my very soul. His breath trembled as he exhaled and finally levered off the chair to stand. The cool air slapped me in the face, drawing me back into the room, out of the silent circle we'd created a moment ago. The sound of the birds outside, the pacing of a guard in the hallway, it rushed back with brilliant clarity. All I could do was stare up at Finn. He spun away, so I stared at his back, my heart aching in a way I'd never felt before. Then I said the words I rarely ever admitted. I'm sorry. It was like a floodgate opening. He swung on me, grabbed me up into his arms and hugged me tight. Unable to react, I hung there in his hold until reality broke in. I wrapped my arms and legs around his long lean body and buried my head into his neck. It wasn't sexual, but an exchange of comfort between us. A shiny second of us converging on the exact same book, on the exact same page, at the exact same time. His arms loosened and I reluctantly let him go to slide down his body. My feet hit the ground and then he released me completely. I didn't like the world outside of his arms. That realization alone was enough to send me staggering back into the chair. Are you all right? He asked. Fine. Just lightheaded is all. Must be all this freewheeling sharing and all that. It's getting to me. Don't let the captain see it or he'll think I've gone soft. Finn snorted. Since your ordeal, he seems more your second in command than mine. Ordering the doctors around, checking that you have everything you need to be comfortable. If I didn't know for sure he liked men, I'd say he has a crush. I shrugged. What can I say? I'm awesome. That earned me another snort, but then he sobered, his mouth forming into a thin line. I don't want you to leave again, Zoey. Please just stay here with us. Work with us, live with us. You say us, but I think you mean you. He hung his head. Astute as ever. Yes, I say us because the captain lives here too, but I do mean me. I want you to stay here with me. We can work together, be a team. God, I wanted to tell him yes. To all of it, give him everything. But in a moment of weakness, he'd reverted to his basest self, forcing me to his will. It wasn't something I could just ignore. It didn't mean I was ready to walk out the door again. Not after seeing so much of what he'd been hiding from me, and so much of what could possibly grow between us. I also couldn't forget what he could do too. How he could hurt me, and I realized belatedly how I could hurt him in return. Maybe there was a special kind of power in that too. The ability to rip apart someone so much that they can't possibly control themselves, even when they should. It wasn't forgiveness, but something I needed to consider as I moved forward. For now I'm staying, I said. I don't know what that looks like for us yet. Do you know what I mean? His smile shot something warm and liquid through my chest. Yes. I understand. We can talk more about it later if you want. For now, it's enough to know you're staying. I let him pull me up to my feet. When I shifted to sit down on the floor again, he caught me by the waist. Wait, we should eat something first. You'll want extra calories to keep your strength up while you heal, and you need it for your magic. My magic? His nostrils flared as he inhaled sharply. You drained it when you almost died, but it's been coming back. I can feel it stronger now than it was before. It's the only reason you feel my emotions so keenly through the bond. Otherwise, it would be a mere whisper to you. Great. Something else to add to my ever-growing list of worries. I need to learn to control it. To use it. To understand it. He locked eyes with me and brought my hand to his lips. I couldn't help but lean into him as he pressed his mouth to the top of my knuckles. I vow to help you control your magic. Anything and everything you want to know will be available to you. A shot of pure lust rocked through me. What if all I want to know is where your bed is? I expected him to be shocked or to play off my words as a joke. I wasn't prepared for a spike of heat to arch through me. Or the devastatingly sexy smile curling his lips. Breakfast first, he whispered against the back of my hand, then tugged me out the door. Chapter 11. Despite the promise in Finn's eyes throughout breakfast, I found my strength waning. I had enough time to grab the weapons the captain brought for me, and then hobble up to the bedroom Finn had prepared. Guards still lined the hallways, but they were fewer than when I'd first arrived, if the traipsing up and down the hallway while I'd tried to sleep was any sign. The hallway outside my room was deserted. My door stood ajar, but it should have been closed. I stretched my sides back and forth and wrapped my hand around the knife jutting from the edge of my boot. It wasn't as if I was scared of being in Finn's palace, but when Finn had yelled at me, he'd had a point. I couldn't walk into anything blindly anymore and assume I'd come out on the other side alive. It would seem almost dying twice in the same week had finally given me some perspective. Or perhaps I never wanted Finn to have to escort me to the bathroom again in my lifetime. I pushed the door open, scanning left and right as I revealed more of the room. A rustle came from near my bed and I crept across the room toward the sound. In front of my bed, riffling through the pockets of a leather jacket that looked like the one the surgical team cut off me, was a soldier. One I recognized. Damn it. Why was it always the ones I trusted who betrayed me? I took the knife out and kept it tucked up along my wrist. He thrust my jacket across the bed in disgust. He did the same to the rest of the clothes, not even noticing me standing behind him watching. When he finished with my belongings, he ripped the bedding out from under the mattress and tore the pillows out of their covers. He huffed and cast the pillows to the floor. Finally, he spun around to where I stood in the middle of the room with a smile on my face. You know it's customary to wait for an invitation before you rummage around a woman's bed. His shoulders sank back and by the look on his face he knew I'd caught him. Any chance I can talk my way out of this? I crossed my arms over my chest. No, but you can help yourself. Tell me what you're looking for. It wasn't hard to figure out what he'd been hunting for, but he must not be very smart if he didn't expect I'd locked it up the second I got here. Unless he thought I didn't have a chance with my injuries. His usually perfectly coiffed Captain America hair looked a little mussed today. Even his black-on-black uniform wasn't quite up to the usual standard. Rough day. He narrowed his eyes. Don't act like you know me. You don't even know my name, so don't pretend you care. I never said I did. You just look a little flustered is all. We can chat about it because you're not walking out of here, no matter what you do. He assessed me head to toe, and I could practically hear him weighing the odds of taking me on, and considering how injured I was. My next step forced me to swallow my pride. I plucked that ever-present bond between Finn and I. It probably didn't matter, since the man across from me wouldn't be able to feel it. No doubt Finn already sensed my agitation, and would come running any moment. Before that, I wanted to have a chat with my friend here, because once the captain got hold of him, he wouldn't be talking anymore. Are you working for Esteban then? The guard winced and closed his eyes as if just the name pained him. You shouldn't say his name so casually. I chuckled. The man has tried to kill me at least twice now. He's also threatened to rape me, so I think we're on a first-name basis. Are you working for him voluntarily, or is he holding something over you? If I said he forced me to do this, that I didn't want to, would you believe me? I'm not the one you'd need to convince. Now, if you've ripped a hole in my brand new jacket, well, then we might have a lengthier discussion. He turned to look at the clothing on the bed, and it seemed to finally dawn on him that they were all new pieces, freshly washed and folded by Holly's staff. I grinned at him and said, the surgical team cut everything off me when I got here. Even my favorite leather jacket. Panic entered his eyes. His feet shifted toward the door, and I waved my hand to catch his attention. We aren't done talking. You can leave soon enough. What were you looking for? I sauntered toward the bed, which forced him around by the wardrobe. I kept my back to him, sat the knife on the bed, and nonchalantly folded my clothing back into a neat pile. When I finished, he still stood there, eyeing me and then the door. I faced him again, the knife back in hand, both arms behind my back. You have nothing to say for yourself at all? How about an easier question? Were you spying on us the whole time, reporting back to your master whenever we scurried off on a mission? He narrowed his eyes, his nostrils flaring. So that was a yes then. While we're on the topic, anything you can tell me in return for your straight-up betrayal? Maybe provide me with a little leverage. Another long stare. I took that as a no. I wandered a little closer, and he scuttled backward. He passed the open doorway to bump against a table nestled against a couch. So, you won't tell me what you were looking for. You won't admit you were spying. And you won't give me any information about my enemy. Why should I keep you alive then? I struck something because he surged toward me and said, you won't kill me. I peered behind my shoulder and then back at him. Who says I won't kill you? You're not like these Phi, he said, as though the Phi were the worst people in the world. You don't kill people. You're a bounty hunter. The laugh bubbled out of me. Kid, when have I ever said I don't kill people? Do I enjoy it? No. But hey, you attack me, I'll attack back, whatever happens, happens. I'm not attacking you, he said, clearly unsettled by the conversation as he moved from foot to foot like a toddler needing to pee. I gave him one of my favorite, slightly unhinged smiles and flicked the knife up into sight of his gaze. I don't know. I'm injured, you're armed and in my bedroom. It seems like you're attacking to me. He blinked and scurried back into the table again, hands up. Wait. Hold on a minute. I tossed the knife between my hands, spinning it back and forth. Tell me what you were hunting for. With his eye on the knife, he stuttered, I was supposed to find a watch. I checked your apartment, but it wasn't there. Then I came here and well, you caught me looking through your things. How did you get into my place? The landlord gave me a key. Remembered seeing my face. It was easy to convince him I needed to get something for you. I groaned. I'm going to kill that little bastard. First Finn and now you. At the very least, I need to move since your hands have been all over my stuff. Now he just looked put out. I didn't take anything. You would have if you'd found what you were looking for. But my question now is, why you? You were here when I got here the first time, so that means you've been spying for a while. Maybe even sent in for that sole purpose. Are you a mage too? No, the boss would have been able to sense it. I nodded, creeping closer to him. And you've been reporting on what? Finn's activities or the captain? A pulse through the bond told me Finn was on his way to me. I ignored it, focusing on the guard. He shook his head at me. No, it wasn't like that. I was only supposed to keep watch. I was only given a job when I was needed. Like now. He hung his head, and I strolled forward until only a few feet separated us. Do you know anything about the watch? What it does? Why he wants it back? No, he said, defeat heavy in his tone. I wasn't told anything. Just to find it and bring it to him. That caught my interest. Where and when were you supposed to give it to him? He squared his shoulders. I'll tell you if you let me walk out of here. If he hadn't realized he wasn't leaving this house again, he was dumber than I thought. Sure, I'll let you walk out this room and I won't follow you, but only if you're honest. And I'll know if you're lying. How? One of the little tricks I picked up as a bounty hunter. And one of the little tricks I suspected I possessed, thanks to the magic in my blood. I'm supposed to hand it off to him tonight. Where? Here. The contact was meant to meet me on the back lawn at midnight. Disappointment clogged my throat. Now, who was being the idiot? Of course Esteban wouldn't come here. Thanks, I said, still trying to play it cool. Go ahead, out the door like I promised. He stumbled toward the door, glancing back at me like I might change my mind at any minute. I smiled at him and he picked up his pace, his gaze still locked onto me. He walked right into the captain, who stood just on the other side of the doorframe. I stalked forward, blocking him from returning to my room, effectively caging him in. With surprising speed he spun toward me, knife already in his hand. I dodged the first swipe, blocking his arm with my forearm, and brought my knife up and sliced across his midsection. Pain splintered across my ribs and I clamped my jaw down to stop from moaning aloud. His knife clattered to the hardwood floor. The captain seized him by the collar and jerked him into the hallway. Finn shoved by them both and grabbed my arms, surveying every inch of me. I rolled my eyes at him. I'm fine. Stop fretting. He didn't even scratch me. I couldn't think with his hands on my skin, his uncertainty and worry beating at me from the inside out. It took a moment for him to settle, but when he did, he stepped back, his usual calm facade over his face again. Good. Do you need anything? I stared at the bed. A nap. Also some practice. Things in my chest are tight. Swiping across like that felt sharper than it should have. You can practice once your strength has returned. I scoffed. And you can rethink that tone and that order before I walk out of here. As soon as the words escaped my mouth, I regretted them. A wave of sadness brushed my senses. I didn't mean it like that. I only meant that you can't order me around. That aspect of our relationship hasn't changed. You know I don't take orders well, especially when delivered as if they are for my benefit. Now I promise not to gallivant off and push myself too hard, if you also promise to rein in the high-handedness. I don't belong to you. Even if some more things change between us, I still will only belong to myself. Needing to change the subject, I pointed toward the door with my knife. What's the captain going to do with him? Finn stared at anything except my face while he answered. Take him away, question him probably. Other than that, I leave those decisions up to him. Will he kill him? Finn shrugged. Do you care? Not particularly, but he seemed like he didn't want to turn spy if that matters. I reached out and turned Finn's face toward me. Will you look at me? I'm sorry. The threat to leave just came out before I thought about it. I didn't mean it. His gaze softened. The captain has a way to erase memories. He'll take out the ones involving us, this house, all of it, and send him on his way. How many years of his memory is he about to lose? It's better than his life. Fair point. Given the choice, I would probably prefer amnesia as well. Maybe. I want to go do some practice. Will you please come to the sparring room with me and monitor things and make sure I don't overexert myself? I caught a wash of relief through the bond before he nodded once. No weapons though. Just stretching and hand-to-hand for now until you build your strength back up. The captain can come help too. He's better at fighting while injured than I am since his self-healing factor is lower than mine. I shoved the knife back into my boot and we headed toward the door. He let me precede him into the hall, but walked beside me as we made our way down to the training room. I tilted my head at him. What is my healing factor then? I've noticed it seems faster, but I wasn't sure since we have augmented it with your magic since we met. You seem to spend a lot of magic keeping me from falling apart. The captain sat on the blue training mats, his arms braced behind him, his legs stretched out front. So we're doing this then? You couldn't talk her out of it? I smiled. Nope. Let's go. The captain eyed Finn and turned to give me an assessing look. He didn't use all the tools at his disposal to convince you then. Chapter 12. I gasped at his tone. Was that a sex joke, Fitzwilliam? Because gross. The answering curl of his lip at the purposefully wrong name made the quip so worth it. It's obvious you two are going to jump into bed together. You might as well get it over with, he said, so the fallout can be over and done with so we can focus on work again. I advanced on him and kicked one booted ankle off the other. Spoken like a man who isn't getting laid. Let's do this, unless you're playing helpless victim today and we have to maneuver around you as we spar. He shoved to standing and circled me. You really should get some rest. He means well, and so do I, even if you don't want to think so. Pot kettle kettle pot. That's a lovely color you're wearing. Weren't you laid out on a hospital bed a few days ago too? He stretched his arm across his body, hooking the other over the outside right in front of his elbow. I heal differently than you. Plus, I have significantly more years of healing and recovering than you do. I know when to push and when to pull back. If you're done with the lecture, maybe we can practice. Finn stepped onto the mat. At the very least, stretch first. Despite my huff, they were both right. I threw myself onto the mat and worked through some stretches while I glared at them both. Finn broke the awkward silence first, stretching his arms over his head. I watched, not even bothering to hide the assessing rove of my gaze from him. I already told her no weapons and she agreed, he said. Only stretching and gentle sparring. I forced a smile to my face. How about we try something different, if you guys don't want me throwing any punches? They both stared at me wide-eyed. What? I'm not completely unreasonable. Besides, I have ulterior motives. Yes? Finn asked, taking the bait. Let's test my magic, see what happens. When they both protested at once, I held up my hand. I need to learn what I'm doing before I hurt myself or someone else. I also need to know what strengths or weaknesses I possess on that front. The chief used to tell me a hunter always knows her weaknesses so she can compensate for them. The captain laughed. I'm surprised you admit you have any. I narrowed my eyes and pulled my knees to my chest, hugging them in to stretch my lower back. Oh, I do. My right ankle is weak when I run. And my left hip seizes up when it's going to rain. Finn snorted. Anything else we should know about? I ran my gaze from his lips to his crotch. Nothing else I'm going to share with the entire group. A slow roll of heat shot through the room. You two keep it in your pants or take it somewhere else, the captain said. A light pink washed onto Finn's cheeks and it made me smile to know I could make him blush like that. In front of his friend, who had likely been knee-deep in Finn's secrets since before I was born. Fine, we'll test your magic but gently, Finn said, avoiding my gaze. Only if you agree not to push too hard and to warn us if you are feeling weak. I tucked my legs, sitting cross-legged on the mat. Can I stay here or do I need to stand? Stay, the captain said and plopped in front of me a few feet between our mirrored postures. Finn sat to my right in a similar position. We'll start with your phi side. Keep in mind, we don't know what or how your magic works together. Technically, phi and mage magic is not complementary and shouldn't work together very well. So what we discover may change with age, it may be a singular occurrence or hell I don't even know. He didn't seem upset about me having magic, but more so about the fact that he couldn't figure it out. I'm going to look inside you now, he said. It won't hurt. It wasn't supposed to sound sexy, but I couldn't help the answering pulse through my body. He ignored it, thankfully, before I embarrassed myself in front of the captain again. Finn closed his eyes. Shish. Something brushed my senses and I closed my eyes too. The scent of freshly cut grass and the warm heat of summer washed over my skin. Finn's voice broke through the soft light in my head. Phi magic is the magic of nature. It's the use of the natural world to augment the magic that lives in all of us. Even humans have this tiny kernel of magic since they were born of this earth. The keys to Phi magic are balance and control. You must always ensure you don't take too much from any one source of power, while at the same time, never losing control once you've tapped into a source. I tried not to fidget. This was why I sucked at meditating. What do you mean, source? The world around us, the fire within us, are all sources of magic. You can borrow that power and use it for yourself. Try to see if you can tap into it. Feel it in the earth, the trees, the air, the sunlight, anything. The only natural thing to me in the room was Finn himself. I could feel him so easily through the bond. I brushed against our connection and heard his rushed inhale. He'd said balance, so I tried to carefully gently pull something from him, but the tighter I tried to hold on, the less I felt able to grasp it. I opened my eyes and stared between the two men. Both sat perfectly still, eyes shut tight. I envied their stillness. I tried, but it didn't work. The captain spoke up. Magic is like a muscle, a skill the same as any other. Practice, use it, and the more you do, the easier it will be to wield. Thanks, Yoda, I grumbled, shutting my eyes again, forcing my brain back to focus. What do I do when I've got the power? Then it's about your will, Finn said. You can't take magic from another living source and simply let it sit. The natural world is always moving, always changing. Once you have the power, focus your will and use it however you feel comfortable. Some Fae use spell words to focus their magic. Some use amulets, stones, weapons. It's about something personal to you. I let out a long sigh. All right, McGonagall. How about mage magic? What's that all about? As expected, the captain took up the instruction. Mage magic, the counter to Fae magic, is the magic of destruction. It's not inherently evil nor good. It will depend on the aforementioned will and the power you put behind it. The source of mage magic is always from other sources than himself before he uses his own power. Mage magic is far more temperamental than Fae magic. And most mage magic can be stored and saved, but that is usually done by channeling and stealing someone else's powers to augment your own. Be careful, that power can also change you. The more you gain this way, the more you'll want, and it's a slippery slope. Mages often use artifacts to store power they channel into it to use later. My eyes popped open. Do you guys think that's what's in the watch? Some of Esteban's power? They both sagged from their perfectly upright postures. When they finally met my eyes, I waved my hands excitedly. What if that's why he wants it back, because it has a chunk of his power in it? Can we get it out? Use it. Finn recoiled and the captain shook his head. It would be possible, but it's not a good idea, the captain said. Esteban's magic has been so corrupted by years of destroying Fae. Channeling that into you wouldn't be comfortable or forgiving on your soul. Okay, so a hard pass to that then. Is there a way to empty it of the magic? Like, to get rid of it so no one can use it? The men stared at me. What? Why are you looking at me like that? The captain's mouth opened and closed and then he clamped his lips shut. I've never thought about just channeling out an artifact's power to let it go back to the source. Would it restore itself into the Fae it was stolen from? Finn wore an equally struck expression. In theory, if they were still alive. And if not, it would likely remain with the mage channeling it out of the artifact. Looking for a home, a well to fill. That put a dampener on things. It would be fun to rip Esteban's magic away from him bit by bit, but I didn't want to have to take any of that evil into myself. So what do you think of my magic? Could you feel it? The men shared a look. I bounced my gaze between them. What? You have magic, Finn began. Both Fae and mage power, but it's different. How so? I couldn't keep the high-pitched question inside. Neither of them would understand how tiring it was being different. I trained as a bounty hunter from 12 years old. That put me ahead of my peers, setting me apart. I was the adopted daughter of the chief, which pushed me further away from the norm. And then there was the fact that I was damn good at my job. All of those things compounded meant I never made friends inside the bounty hunter community. Did I have that to look forward to in the magical community as well? Finn didn't seem to mind my mage blood, but others would surely. And mages all seemed to be dicks, well, except for the captain, but he was a dick too. Just not an evil one. Finn shuffled toward me on the mat and pulled me into his arms. White light arched between us. I shoved away from his chest. What the hell was that? He stared down at me, brow ruffled, his bottom lip tucked between his teeth. I have a theory. Close your eyes and see if you can touch a natural source, Fae power. I closed my eyes and this time the magic came easily. Like winding a thread around my fingers. I popped my eyes open and snuggled back into his arms. I did it. He stroked his hand over my hair. The tension between us pulled so taut it almost hurt to have his skin against mine. The captain cleared his throat and I gently withdrew from Finn. What's the theory? Harlan, touch her please. The captain's eyes snapped to Finn, and then he crawled across the mat and took my hand in his. Power surged up under my touch, but this was different. Dirty. I couldn't just handle it, I had to take it. I pulled away from him and scowled. I don't like that. Agree, he said. Why do you think I rarely do magic and focus more on my other skills? I snorted and rubbed my hands together. They felt kind of dirty after touching the captain. It wasn't intimate in the least, but it felt that way. Like it connected us in a new way neither of us was comfortable with. The captain and Finn stared at each other again, and there was a ripple in the air. I'd forgotten they could somehow speak mentally. I already had a front row seat to Finn's emotions. Was that the next step? The idea didn't sit well with me. I have an idea, the captain said, turning back to me. An idea he'd clearly just discussed with Finn in their heads without me hearing. And I let my annoyance out with the word. He ignored me, got to his feet and loped off toward the stairs. When he returned he carried 2 small daggers, one black steel sleek and smooth like a sports car of weapons, the other shiny silver with an ornate moonstone hilt. Take these. I didn't reach out but eyed him as he towered over me holding the weapons. Why? Will you humor me? I won't hurt you. Well, not on purpose. Curiosity got the better of me, so I shoved myself to my feet, wincing as a muscle in my side tugged tight. He held the knives out so I could grab the hilts, one in either hand. The moment my fingers closed around them both at the same time, a shiver raced down my spine and something tangible, balanced, settled over me. I stared down at the weapons. They looked pretty basic. What's going on? Finn smiled and joined us in standing. You need to channel your magic. Something you're comfortable with. You can't use Phi and Mage magic at the same time, but you can use one or the other, and having both a Phi weapon and a Mage weapon will help you achieve the balance you need to channel properly. Go on, try it. What should I do? Finn shrugged. It's up to you, but make sure you don't draw too much power from whatever source you use. It will weaken over time. It has to recharge. I closed my eyes and tapped into the Phi power, the one I felt more comfortable wielding, and imagined myself cloaked in light. The light hardened to an invisible armor against my skin, protecting my recently too fragile body. What did you do? Finn asked, surveying me, wariness lurking in his eyes. I smiled and turned toward the captain. Smack me in the face. He laughed and shook his head. I can't say I haven't been tempted. No, do it. Smack me in the face. Let's see if this works. And if it doesn't? Then you get your wish to smack me and I won't hit you back this time. He eyed me, scanning my features. Then he drew back and gave me a light slap on my cheek. I felt nothing, but neither did he, so it didn't prove if it worked. Try one more time with a little feeling, please. His forehead wrinkled and we both purposefully ignored Finn's incredulous glare between us both. The captain reared back and delivered a hearty blow to my cheek. I didn't feel it one bit. He sucked in a breath and gripped his hand against his chest. What the hell? I shouldn't have laughed at him, but I couldn't help it. Well, I guess it worked. Chapter 13. After the captain left to ice his hand, Finn eased the knives from my grasp. At my questioning stare, he shrugged. If you need to channel, it won't work to channel only through weapons. Or else, everything will start looking like a target. You have your own mage weapon. Let's see if we can find you a piece of Phi magic that wasn't created to destroy. He led me down the hall of the armory, but stopped a door short of my version of heaven. When we arrived, Finn held out his hand to stop me. Wait here for a moment. I was surprised but did as he requested, staying outside the room until he entered and flipped on the light. He barely fit inside the room, the size of a walk-in closet but lined with shelves. Books, pictures, random boxes. It hit me before Finn explained. This was his legacy, his memories, his family heirlooms. I feared touching anything, and at the same time I wanted to drag everything off the shelves and dissect it to learn more about the mysterious man who'd changed my life so completely. He picked up a small white box off a shelf and offered it to me. It took me a minute to get the courage to take it, mostly because I didn't want him to see the amazement on my face. Which was idiotic on its own, considering he could probably feel my every twitch down our bond. With shaking hands, I opened the lid on the box to find a silver necklace with a white crystal hanging off it. The crystal came to a sharp point and reflected the soft overhead light of the room from its shiny polished surface. I cleared my throat and pulled the necklace from the box. What is it? Finn took the box, snapped it shut, and placed it back on the shelf, as if he needed a moment to shape the words. It was my sister's. She made it. When we were younger, she loved tinkering with tiny things like this. I thought she'd made it for herself decades ago, but when I asked her about it, she shook her head and told me to keep it safe. That someone I cared about would need it one day. That it's both a tool and a map. I held the crystal to the light, but I couldn't see anything magical. Only its milky white surface. Was your sister some kind of psychic? He shook his head. Not that she ever told me, but Phi women are unpredictable in their magic. As they age, it grows with them, changes. Something to think about for yourself. Why would he give me his sister's necklace? Even if Saul had one day thought it might be for me. After he'd lost her, he'd kept her room like a shrine, and this place, a room full of memories and dust. It was obvious on so many levels he hadn't gotten over her disappearance or death as he thought. Considering my own mental health after losing my family, I couldn't judge anyone for how they did or didn't display their grief. Are you sure you want me to take this? I asked him, looking directly into his eyes as I did. If it was Soul's, you should have it. Keep it here so you can think about her. He took the necklace and opened the clasp, then swirled his finger in a motion for me to turn. I did so, holding my breath. When the necklace touched the hollow of my throat, I gasped. It's vibrating. No, it's singing like my knives do, only differently. Softer, less urgent, less bloodthirsty, I joked. I'd defaulted to that place. The jokes. The sarcasm. Anything to keep my true feelings out of the picture. It didn't work when someone could feel the truth even through my lies. I spun to face him, stepping back until I bumped the shelf, its ledge digging into my shoulder blades. So what do you think about the watch? He gave me an easy smile, leaning on the shelf. I think we should examine it. See if we can figure out its secrets. If Esteban carried it with him, then it must mean something. Whether because of its power or something else, we should find out so we can decide what to do with it. I nodded and stepped out into the hallway so he could exit and lock the door. Then he said, I'll grab it. You go to the training room. If something happens, it might be best to have a soft surface to land on. Thankful for the moment alone, I headed toward the mats while he marched off in the other direction. I twirled the necklace between my fingers. I felt like I was missing something. But I also felt like for the first time, I didn't need to worry about it. The missing piece would be there when I needed it. I plopped onto the mat and stretched out onto the yielding surface. The scent of disinfectant wafted around me, but I'd always kind of liked the smell of clean workout mats. It reminded me of the Chief's basement where we did a lot of my training. My childhood had been stolen from me with the death of my parents, but the Chief had given me a home when I needed it. I absent-mindedly ran the crystal along the chain and then surged up, despite the twinge in my abs. No matter what the Chief had taught me, one part of my training I excelled at from day one had been tracking. It was what made me such a great bounty hunter. I used personal belongings in the homes of my targets to hunt them down. Finn and I had started the process of tracking Saul with the ribbon we'd found, and despite little evidence of his sister's existence at Esteban's last showdown, the scrap of silk seemed legit. What we'd done to find her hadn't been enough though. I hadn't followed the path to the end. I'd been so mired in the middle, sifting through everything else that came up. What if I threw out everything I knew about Saul and her life, and started from the beginning? Started with something like this necklace. That would allow me a cleaner look at who the woman was and what she valued. Despite Finn's love for her, he saw her through rose-colored lenses. He was her big brother. A man who mourned her loss and wanted to extol her virtues. But women were always far more than the pretty picture they painted for others. I needed to dig deeper into her life, look under her bed, bring out the shadows and see what turned up. If I knew anything about a hunt, the shadows were the last place people wanted to look for their loved ones. Before I could formulate a plan of attack, Finn jogged back into the room holding a familiar antique watch. I both enjoyed the sight of his tall, lean frame in motion and hated that we now had one more thing to worry about with the watch. One more problem I'd thrown into the mix by stealing it. Damn, I was an asshole sometimes. He wasn't about to hear it from me, but he'd been right when he said I didn't think things through enough. He held out the watch as I walked toward him. I shook my head. Nope, I'm good. I don't want to hold that thing. What do you see when you look at it? One thing that bastard who tried to steal it taught me is that there is mage writing on the back. Well, he didn't tell me that, I figured it out on my own. He flipped open the watch to peer down at it. I can feel magic coming off it. Phi and mage power, but I can't tell for what purpose. Again he thrust it toward me. I sighed, taking it, and held it in my palm. From what I could tell and what little experience I had with antique pocket watches, it weighed a normal amount. I'm not sure what I should be looking for, I said. He scratched the back of his head and studied me. Try channeling your magic. Your mage magic first. It might give us a clue as to what power it favors. Few things, objects or people can find a balance between the two. I opened the face of the watch and stared down at the tiny hands, focusing so I didn't feel so antsy under Finn's all-seeing gaze. Like they'd just taught me, I tried to match my magic to the power of the watch. The world stopped. Not my world, but everything around me. A tiny hand at the bottom of the watch ticked slowly, like a second hand almost winding around. I watched Finn, who stayed mid-motion in the act of bringing his arm down from his head. His eyes were clear and earnest, his stance relaxed, but he remained perfectly still. My mouth dropped open. Finn? Are you okay? I walked around behind him, bouncing my focus between the watch and him with every step. Then I wandered back to the hall, but I couldn't tell how far the magic radiated. By the time I got back to Finn, the second hand had almost returned to the bottom of the watch. When it did, Finn unfroze and continued his motion as if nothing happened. But he didn't miss the confusion, no doubt etched in my features. What is it? What happened? I held the watch out to him between my fingers and dropped it in his outstretched hand. Not sure what the fuck just happened, but I think it only works for a minute at a time. He looked between me and the watch. What does? That thing just stopped time for about a minute. You were completely frozen. I appreciated we didn't have to do the whole back and forth, really, are you sure thing. He simply believed what I told him. Time magic is tricky. Temperamental. Unstable. Did you do it only once? I nodded. With a smile, he turned my wrist upward and slapped the watch back in my hand. Do it again and see if you can make it last longer this time. Or maybe change the length of time. Do I have to? The captain could do it, right, with his own mage powers? His concern flashed through me, but I ignored it. What about it bothers you? He asked. I couldn't explain why touching the watch made me feel like I had some sort of connection to Esteban. I don't know. Try it one more time for me, he said. Just once more to see if it gives you the same result. I didn't know if it was the sweet way he said for me or if I was going soft, but I took the watch, focused my power, and again the world stopped. Easier this time, as I knew what it had felt like to activate it. I tried to alter the time on the clock, but nothing happened. After 60 seconds, he unfroze and stared at me expectantly. I shook my head and closed the face of the watch. It was the same. 1 minute. He stepped forward and wrapped his fingers around my chin, lifting it gently. Take a break. Go get some coffee. We can go over it again in a bit. Needing to get the hell away from the claim imprinted on my skin from his fingers, I shoved the watch in my pocket and jogged up the stairs to the dining room. As usual, coffee greeted me like an old friend. I leaned against the table and ran the crystal along its silver chain. It was quiet, not even a whisper of sound, but with each pass I felt a thrum through me. A calling under the singing of the pendant. When I touched the watch, it remained static, except for that little second hand which spun all on its own. It didn't make any noises, but it put out something else. A feeling that wasn't Phi nor Mage, but something I would call a signature. This crystal gave off that same signal, but stronger, less effort, more, just more. I couldn't describe how it felt in my mind. Not yet. I used the same sort of signature when I tracked. Everyone had a signature to their lives, their existence. When a hunter found that thread underneath the chaos, it was easy to follow back to its source. I'd hunted many people down with barely a whisper of this feeling. And here I stood with 2 items, both with a strong enough signature that I could likely track anywhere. Finn believed every person had magic. What if this feeling I'd always followed wasn't about a person's life, but but about this tiny thread of magic. Now, with my own powers tossed into the mix like a fucked up salad, I could feel it so much more strongly. I sipped my coffee and closed my eyes, connecting with the crystal. My phi magic surged to the surface, waiting for my will to direct it. But I didn't want it here. I needed to figure out how to dissipate the magic that the crystal stirred up in me enough to use it differently. The last time we'd tried to track Saul, everything had failed. Spectacularly so. Esteban had used my ignorance of my magic and Finn's need to find his sister against us. He'd played us both easily. I couldn't rush off and see what happened like last time. I needed to take the time to consider the angles, the ways the bad guys could use our weaknesses against me. Against Finn. I downed the rest of the coffee and released the necklace to lie against my chest. Finn and the captain would dance in circles right now if they knew I stood here considering my actions and how they affected others for once. Which was why they would never know, not about what I'd figured out or what I might be able to do. Not until I knew if they would help or hinder me. For now, Finn wouldn't know I might be able to find Saul. He couldn't read my mind yet. I shuddered at the thought. Whatever was happening between us, I needed to keep it from going that next step further. I had to keep him out of my head until I had more answers. Chapter 14. I slept the night in the bedroom Holly had prepared for me, and when I entered the dining room for breakfast, Finn sat at the table and the captain hovered near the coffee pot. "Morning," I called out as I took the seat across from Finn. Heat washed across my skin, but I ignored it. Would this be our life now? Both of us leaking emotions, and the other politely pretending they couldn't feel it. The warm simmer under my skin, the answering pool of lust in my core, told me I wouldn't survive that way for long. I avoided looking at Finn while I scooped some French toast onto my plate. I feel sore today. Like in my muscles, but also in a new way. Like I piled 30 extra pounds on me, wandered around for hours, and only just now let them fall away. Finn answered. You can become fatigued from magical use. It's common among those first learning to use their powers. As we said yesterday, it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you can control it, and the longer you can wield it. It'll take time, just like your healing. I glanced over at the captain, who stared into his coffee like it contained the answers to life's questions. Obviously, they'd been discussing something serious when I walked in the room, but I decided against prodding whatever the hell drama it was. Well, I want to hit the mats again today, but to physically work out. I feel stiff in my skin as well. It may sound silly, but I feel like I need to resituate inside it, fit everything in the right place again. I shoved toast in my mouth and smiled at Finn around my bulging cheeks. Let's see him get all hot and bothered by that. I'll come with you, he said. We can see about your range of motion after the surgery and healing. At my look, he added, I promise I'm not playing babysitter. We can work out and you can decide when you've had enough. I didn't believe that for a second, but I let it go because Holly had made French toast and I loved that woman so much for it. As I shoved the delicious food in my face, I thought about tracking Saul. Guilt swamped me, but I pushed it down, praying he didn't catch the emotion in the moments I'd let it flare inside me. I risked a peek at him, but he sliced into his French toast with focus and precision. Comparatively, my plate looked like a minefield, the bread and syrup mixed up in haphazard pieces. It only cemented my choice to keep things about Saul and tracking her to myself until I truly figured it all out. It wasn't just my own need to save my ass from being handed to me again. I remembered his anger, his hurt, all the things he tried to hide every time we flipped over a rock and nothing turned up. No answer, no sister, no way to move forward. I felt guilty, but I wouldn't apologize for protecting him in this. For waiting until I could turn over that rock and hand him something tangible. I wanted to give him that knowledge most of all, put joy on his face for once instead of hurt. The French toast had turned dry in my mouth as my mind had fallen so far down the rabbit hole of my thoughts. I shoved the plate away and stood. Both men eyed me, then my plate and me again. Finn recovered first. You okay? I headed toward the door. Yeah, fine. I'll meet you downstairs when you're done. I wasn't running away, I told myself. I was choosing to focus my attention elsewhere. Hopefully, sparring with Finn would help get me out of my head and back into my body. It would take time to work my magic, and it would take time to feel comfortable with myself again. The more I focused on both, the quicker I could get back to my life and pray others would stop trying to kill me. Well, at least when I wasn't attempting to kill them first. I didn't hold a grudge for self-defense, usually. I threw myself onto the mats and stretched my legs slowly, savoring the way each loosened and eased as I shifted. Already my thoughts were less murky, more focused. I sighed out loud when I twisted into a new position. "Are you stretching or thinking?" Finn asked, walking down the stairs into the workout room. He dressed in loose gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. I hadn't noticed at breakfast, but he'd braided his hair in a French braid, the tail curving around the long column of his neck. I was glad I'd been too focused on food at breakfast, or I would have embarrassed myself. Exactly like I was right now with him staring at me. His little smirk told me he knew exactly the flavor of feeling rolling inside me and appreciated the compliment. When he reached the edge of the mats, he ran through his own stretching routine and then kicked off his shoes and socks to stand near my ankles. I peered up the long line of his toned body and gulped. Give me a minute." He shrugged and stripped his shirt off over his head. It hit the mat on the far side of the room while he jumped and jogged around to warm up. Holy sweet mother of mercy. Men should not look like that. Every inch of his body was like chiseled ivory. While I knew what he looked like half naked from my short and completely innocent jaunt to his bedroom, I hadn't seen all of this. I couldn't glance away, even though I was sure he could feel every damn bit of my reaction to him. That's not fair. How do you expect me to fight you when you've got all that happening? His smirk confirmed my suspicions. He liked me staring at him. What? You've never fought with someone you found attractive before? Well, sure, but it's usually like, hey, this guy has really soft hair, as I grab it and shove his face into a bar top. I waved at his bare skin. This is not the same thing. Distractions can get you killed. I leaned back from my stretch. Fine, you want to play that game? I tugged the hem of my shirt over my head and tossed it to join his. You ready? The slow, soft flutter of heat across the bond from his reaction to me made me understand the smile on his face. It felt like someone had dug their fingers into the muscles at the back of my neck and massaged it gently, but firm enough that I had to let out a moan after each pass. Shit, this wasn't simply a distraction, but a damn disturbance. It took control to keep myself firmly seated on the mat and finish my stretching. He stopped his warm-up and simply stared at me, each of my twists and turns punctuated by the heady feeling pulsing down the bond from him. It hit me then, before he'd even laid a hand on me, that I was going to fuck him. And it would not be a gentle thing between us. Not with how much tension had built and stretched in place of our pretend indifference. I stood and hopped around a few times, but it wasn't necessary. I'd been warmed up since he walked in. Ready? He made a noise in his throat. I let him come at me first, but he didn't throw a physical punch. He used his magic and clocked me straight in the face. It hurt like a bitch. What the fuck was that? He closed the distance between us and lifted my chin to inspect my cheek. Sorry, I assumed since magic was on the table, it was on the table for sparring too. Are you okay? I rubbed my cheek and jerked my chin from his grip. Fine. I didn't think about it, but you're right. I won't have time to tell the magic-wielding bad guys not to hit me with it since I'm a student driver. His answering smile curled through me. I shoved him back with my hands and then used my phi magic to push him further with a blast of air. Good, he said, and all I heard was the bedroom voice he used to say it. I took another punch to the face that made my eyes water, and he winced as my leg went out from under me. You need to learn to block, he said. Use your power like a shield, sort of how you did with the captain, but not directly against your body. I used the same air I'd hit him with and hardened it around me, curving it into a sort of wall. Okay, try again, see if it worked. Finn stared at me as though he was trying to knock me over, his gaze hard. When nothing happened to me, and then he smiled, I couldn't help but smile back. It worked. Yes. The second my emotions surged, the air fell away and his hit came through. I stumbled back and fell onto my ass. Damn it. He strode back over to me and crouched on the mat. I told you magic is about controlling your emotion. It's about balance above all. Easy for him to say, with years of practice, and not currently being assaulted with all this extra emotional output. I blinked up at him, my mouth falling open. You say it's about control, and yet I can feel everything you're shooting at me through the bond. Things I don't think you would say out loud. He studied me. You don't think I'd tell you you're beautiful? Or that I want you? Oh, so we're going straight there. The easy confidence he put into the words touched me. There was no shame and no fear. How long had he felt this way, though? I didn't trust it, especially with my mage blood setting me apart, and knowing how he felt about mages in general. He leaned forward. I never realized how much you do that, tuck yourself away for fear of others seeing too much of what you feel. It doesn't work as well when you can't hide it, right? Him calling me out on my shit didn't put me in a mood for romance. And yet I knew that when he looked at me, he saw me. Not my magic, not my abilities, not how I could help him. I can't hide anymore, I whispered. He shook his head and traced the edge of my jaw with his thumb. No, but you couldn't hide before either. Not from me. I let you believe you could. I slapped his hand away and shoved him back with my magic. He landed hard on his back with a gentle oof. When he moved to get up, I curved my magic around him, the same way I did before, but instead of keeping things out, I used it to keep him contained. He stayed there poking and prodding my shield with his own magic until I hovered over him, staring down. His voice came out soft, as if he called out from inside another room. Impressive, but how long can you hold it? I shrugged and decided to get a little payback. Payback and reward rolled into one. My favorite kind of treat. He watched me, his magic falling away in a shimmer around us. I pulled the shield off him and knelt down beside his hip, then swung one leg over his body and straddled him, aligning my hips just below his navel. He had a foot of height on me, so I couldn't reach his face easily from my position. When he moved to grab hold of me around the waist, I shoved him down with my hands and my magic. I gave myself this brief moment to enjoy the warm heat of his skin against my palm. But that enjoyment proved too distracting. He flipped us so I lay on my back and he pressed me down into the mat. Nice trick, he murmured, bringing his face in line with mine. You're learning quickly, but always be ready for distractions in any form, magical or physical. He arched into me, and the firm length of his cock rubbing against my inner thigh brought the entire world around us into sharp focus. I stared up at him, wondering how we'd gone from polite civility to the overwhelming pressure building around us right now. Instead of giving myself the opening to ruin everything, I cupped the back of his neck and dragged his face to mine. Before I finished closing the distance, I halted and gave myself a second to just look at him. His eyes glowed a deep aquamarine. His lips looked full and soft. I'd been thinking about kissing them for far longer than I would admit under oath. Zoey, he whispered, his gaze roving over my features the same way I studied his. All I wanted right now was him inside me. My body felt molten, liquid, and so unfulfilled I ached from it. No man in my life had ever amped me up this much, especially without touching me first. What's happening? I whispered. Is this real? He finished. What do you think? I skimmed my fingers through his silky soft hair. I don't know. It could be the bond, maybe it's influencing us. He shook his head and then swallowed as his eyes dropped to my lips. No, the bond only shows what's present. It can't fabricate something that isn't there. Nor amplify it. It shows only the truth. As if confirming his words, another blast of heat spread through my body. Along with it came a tendril of something much more illicit, a deep need I couldn't even begin to understand. Not because I didn't feel it myself, but because I did, and I'd pushed it away, denied it for so long. Zoey. I met his eyes. Yeah. Are you going to kiss me or not? Because I'm about to come out of my skin if you don't touch more of me. I swallowed heavily, my heart threatening to tear itself out of my chest. Board the room. If anyone interrupts, I can't guarantee their safety. Chapter 15. Having sex with Finn was like trying to take one bite of a triple-layer fudge brownie. One tiny bite would never be enough. After we hauled ourselves off the workout mats and found our scattered clothing, Finn dissipated his wards and dragged me by the hand up the stairs down the long hallway and into his bedroom. We didn't pass a single soul on the way. Part of me feared meeting the captain's eye when I saw him next. No doubt he would know exactly what went on between Finn and me in the training room. I'd seen how he felt about Finn, and I didn't want to rub it in his face. Not after we'd started to become sort of friends. Finn didn't wait for me to follow him. He scooped me up into his arms, marched into his room and slammed the door behind us. I wrapped my thighs around his hips and snaked my arms around his neck for balance. With our height disparities, I would never be able to stand on my tiptoes and kiss him comfortably. Like this, with his warm skin under my hands and his palms cupping my ass, I could lean in and take all I wanted. He HMMMED into my mouth, letting noises free I assumed he'd kept inside during our first round of sex. I loved the vibration against my chest and the sensual roll of lust down our bond. Nothing neat and tidy about it or our relationship, but I didn't mind a bit of a mess when that mess led me to over 6 feet of sculpted thigh muscle. Even after our romp, he still tasted like breakfast but also salty from sweat and my body. The memory of his tongue on my clit spiked my arousal higher, ramping up his own in turn. He tossed me onto the bed and crawled between my legs. I winced as his hips made contact with mine. Looked like we would have to take a break until my virgin body caught up with its own needs. "Sorry," I said. "If it will make you feel better, you can lick my pussy later and throw some healing behind it." He gasped and pretended to be scandalized. "Zoey Salix, what language is that for a lady?" I snorted and poked at his chest. He rolled over to lie on the bed and snagged my hand in his own. Even though I could see the hard outline of his cock against his pants, he didn't push me for more. Fuck. I was falling in love with him. The thought struck me, not like lightning all at once but in a series of flashes. From the moment he'd cornered me in the alley when we met, to his devastating smile every time I told him off for one thing or another. I quickly shoved it all into a box in my mind and forced it out of sight. Finn couldn't see any of it. Hell, I wasn't ready to see any of it, let alone share these feelings with someone else. I cleared my throat and stared up at his ornate gold inlay ceiling. I just want to be clear, taking out the Black Mage is still our major priority. I don't want a repeat of the last time we faced him. If you have a chance to get him, even if it means my safety, you take him the fuck out. Finn tensed beside me, his eyes closed, his hand tightening on mine. Is that really what you want? I rolled onto my side so I could look at him. Yes. I won't have you resenting me, or anything you might feel for me if you saved me over Saul or killing him. I'd rather die than live under that sort of pressure. His forehead bunched up and he still didn't look at me. It took a long moment for me to realize what saying all that meant. I would rather die than have him hate me. I would rather die than have him take these feelings away. Well, fuck. So much for locking down my secret emotions. The bedroom door opened, and we both arched our necks up so we could see who walked in. The captain stood there in his usual black-on-black uniform glaring between us. Oh good, you two are still dressed. Finn, I need a word. Now. The edge to his tone made me wince. He didn't even look at me as he walked out, waiting for Finn to follow him. Finn climbed off the bed but turned back to me. Lay down, get some rest. I'll come find you when he's done with whatever he needs me for. I waved him away. I'm a big girl, don't worry. And good luck dealing with all that. His eyebrows tugged down and he ran his hands through his mussed hair. I thought he would say something else, but then he shook his head and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. Finn's bed was similar to the one in my room but wider. Why did he need this much space? Unless he regularly hosted orgies with the guards, orgies I'd never been invited to. I scooched up to the top of the bed, shoved back the covers and climbed under the soft sheets. The pillows smelled like him, crisp and a little spicy. I resisted the urge to shove my face into them and breathe his scent into my lungs. All I would need was for one of them to return and witness that. I snuggled into the bedding and closed my eyes. I deserved a nap, but I wanted to practice a little with my magic before I drifted off to sleep. Since I only had the necklace with me, it meant I would just focus on the thigh magic. Half drifting, I thought about the fine cotton threads of the sheets, feeling them in my mind's eye. Careful not to tug for fear of ripping them apart, I simply allowed them to exist and noticed the beauty of the magic within them. When Finn instructed me to find the natural sources of the world, I doubted his sheets were on the list of recommended candidates, but it gave me something to focus on that wasn't replaying the incredible sex in my head over and over. I drifted off to sleep thinking about Finn and the way he released himself to me so completely. He had been for a while and I hadn't noticed. I was so wrapped up in my own selfish thoughts and feelings. After so many sendings between Saul, or maybe Esteban, and me, it only took me a few seconds to realize someone had hijacked my sleep once again. But by whom? I stared around a room with soft, deep carpets that cradled my bare feet. Along the walls, in beautiful jewel tones, were pillows and low couches. It looked like something out of an Arabian Nights tale. Or someone had shoved me inside a genie bottle. "Hello," I called into the empty room. Why the hell bother using the magic for ascending if you didn't intend to show up to your own party? Thankfully, I didn't have to subject myself to this shit anymore. I closed my eyes and focused on touching the Phi magic within me. "Wait," a voice said from behind me. I spun around to come face to face with Esteban. He wore the same black tuxedo he wore the night we met for the first time. His wavy black hair was coiffed and styled the exact same way. A little at a loss for words, I just stared at him. Not because he was handsome, and he was, but because I couldn't believe he would try to do ascending with me now. I knew his tricks. I was ready. A knowing grin slid onto his face. I glared at him. "What do you want? And be advised, the second I wake up, I'm learning how to ward my dreams from sendings." He held up his hands as he stepped closer, keeping his palms showing as if he approached a wild animal. "I mean you no harm. This," he waved around the room, "is for you. My way of apologizing for how I acted when we saw each other last." I had to snap my mouth closed when I realized it had fallen open. Anger scorched a path through the hazy, relaxing morning I'd been having. "Are you apologizing for being a disgusting pig, for trying to kill me, for using my friend's weaknesses against him, for trying to kill my other friend, or for taking over my dreams against my will?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off, already launching into my next verbal attack. "Or maybe you want to apologize for the time you had your men torture me. Oh wait, I know. What about the time you murdered my parents in cold blood and left me alive to find their dead bodies?" He scanned my face, as if trying to find the answer to something there. "Would you have preferred I kill you, along with them?" I took a step forward into his space. "I'd have preferred if you'd never entered my life at all. Is that still on the table? Because that's my choice." A wave of power washed over me. It wasn't his but mine, giving my skin a subtle golden glow. "As you can see, I'm not an innocent little girl anymore, so I'll give you a warning. I'm coming for you. And when this is all over, my knife will be the one cutting your throat." As if my words didn't faze him, he circled me, studying the workout clothes I'd fallen asleep in. "Oh, I'm very aware you are no longer the innocent girl who found your parents as a child. In fact, I can tell you lost what little scrap of innocence you had remaining to you." I huffed and clenched my fists along my thighs. "What I do or don't do is none of your business." The dream world rippled around us, throwing me sideways. When I caught my bearings again, I found myself laying in a bed, still in Esteban's Arabian Nights fantasy, but now I'd been stripped down to my bra and underwear. I shoved up, but a wave of power pressed me back into the mattress. Intent on controlling my breathing, focusing on my training, I let none of my inner turmoil show on my face. "Oh, I see what's happening here. You sucked the magic out of too many little mage girls, Esteban, and now you have to force yourself on women in their dreams?" A growl blasted into my ear, and I reeled from the sight of his face so close to mine. "Don't speak unless you know what you are referring to. While Olivia was a fun little distraction, I am content to fulfill my mate bond one day. No Phi would ever betray that." I tried to lift my hands from the bed, but he'd stuck them there with his magic. "Well, last I checked you're not Phi, so how can you have a mate? A Phi bond can never be broken. Even if a Phi dies, the mate will feel the loss keenly for the rest of his or her life." I let out a long sigh. "Get to the point here. I have things to do, a lot of really hot sex to have." He let out another long growl into my ear, pressing his body along my side. Through the tightly fitted tux, I could feel the hard length of his arousal against my thigh. Gag. I wiggled enough to buck my shoulder into his face. He reared back and glared through his fingers. No blood came out of his nose. Damn. Always next time. I focused on my magic, intending to rip myself out of the dream no matter how much magical energy it cost me. When I felt like I'd almost unraveled the sending, Esteban wrapped his fingers around my throat. His touch was proprietary, as if he owned me. As if applying pressure to subdue me would enhance that ownership. "The rest can wait," he said. "What I want now is the property you stole from me." I stared up in his eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about." You're a terrible liar, Zoey. I bucked away from him, trying to dislodge his grip on my neck. Fuck you, I'm an amazing liar. Maybe with you, I just don't feel the need to put in the effort. He leaned in and smiled, his white teeth gleaming in the candles scattered around the room. Oh, I promise, little one, when I see you and finally get you into my bed, you'll never have a problem with effort again. How did this creepy asshole just keep getting more and more disturbing? Was there a bad guy escalation scale I'd missed somewhere? Maybe someone should tell him he'd gone a few steps past psychotic a long time ago. Let's say for a second I had something that belonged to you. What would it mean to you to get it back? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. He removed his hand thankfully, and the weight and heat of him surrounding me subsided enough I felt more comfortable drawing a full breath. What do you want? He asked. I shrugged. I mean, you dead, but I figure that's probably not something you'll offer in exchange. How about Saul? You remember her, right? Give me Saul and I'll give you your trinket back. He paced beside the bed as I tested the magic holding me down. Unfortunately, that's not on the table either. I studied him, turning my face so I could watch him better. Then it hit me. Oh my fucking god. You don't have her, do you? The whole thing in the woods, all of it, you were trying to get us to hunt her down for you. He surged to my side and clamped his hand around my neck. I woke with a gasp, clawing at myself to get his grip away from me. I shuddered and rolled forward to catch my breath. Finn sat next to me on the bed, his hand still clutching me from where I assumed he'd shaken me awake. I stared up into his eyes, feeling the familiar pressure of the bond between us. Then I threw myself into his arms and let him hold me. Make me a promise. If it's me or him, you kill him. Don't hesitate. I'd rather die than be subjected to what that man has in store for me. Chapter 16. Once I wiped away the tears, Finn pulled back to stare into my eyes. What happened? Tell me. No doubt he already had a feeling, considering how Esteban had been using my dreams to contact me before, but it meant a lot he asked me, instead of letting himself get dragged into the possibilities that might leave us fighting things out. I sighed and threw myself back into his soft pillows, closing my eyes at the scent of him surrounding me. I was going to take a nap. When I fell asleep, he was waiting for me in like a harem fantasy. Finn snorted at the disgusted look on my face and waved at me to continue. It didn't feel like the forest dreams, so I was pretty confused at first. I waited for someone to say something, and then when I was about to use my power to bring me out of it, he appeared out of nowhere. He knew we'd had sex and called me out on it. You know me and how well I take men giving me shit because of their own hang-ups. I set him in his place and told him to leave me alone. Of course, I left out some important details about Saul, but I still hadn't worked my way through everything regarding her yet. I didn't want to get Finn's hopes up if she was alive out there somewhere. He would throw himself into finding her, whether she wanted to be found or not. Which was an entirely new obstacle to consider. If Esteban didn't have her, then why didn't she come home? Why not come back to Finn, her loving older brother? My reasoning so far worked out that she wasn't able to because she didn't trust the people here or she feared something. I even wondered if she'd become a mage and didn't return because she knew or thought she knew how Finn felt about our kind. Our kind? I let that thought barrel through me. When had I started thinking of myself as a fae or a mage? The bedroom door opening brought me out of my reverie. The captain crossed the room and stared down at us from the edge of the bed. So what happened now? His tone was clipped and professional. The easygoing friendship we'd formed was stripped away. It made my chest ache. Finn reached out and squeezed my hand, no doubt feeling the ache that took root in my chest. I shook myself to business and shoved past him toward the door. I'll let Finn fill you in while I get dressed. Basically, Esteban is being a creepy dick, and we should head to his mansion to see if we can turn anything up. Before I closed the door behind me, I hesitated and faced them again. He feels wounded, striking out and hoping he hits something just to make others feel his pain. I can't explain it, but something is off with him. The captain and Finn shared a glance I didn't have the stomach to try and unravel right now. I walked out and headed toward my room to hunt down some real clothes and retrieve my weapons. I wasn't facing Esteban without my black steel knives. Not when they longed to feel his blood coat their sharp points. I dressed in a pair of my favorite worn-in skinny jeans. While leather kept me from getting cut up, I wanted to feel like myself right now. A black t-shirt, black boots, and my new jacket completed the look. After I stuffed my hair up into a messy bun, I strapped on my knife sheaths and sighed as the weapons sang through me. They seemed to say, "Welcome home." I gave them a fond little pat, piled up my dirty clothes, and stared at the bed. Would Finn want me to stay with him now? I shook my head. I couldn't let myself get into the details without talking to him first. We hadn't discussed our relationship post-sex, but from the way I'd felt in his arms through the bond, I assumed he wanted more of me than just my vagina. But hell, men were men. With a sigh, I ran the crystal necklace along the chain and considered my choices. Stay here in the house with Finn, have lots of really hot sex, and what? Live happily ever after. As a bounty hunter, I'd never even entertained I'd get a fairy tale ending. I always assumed I would go out in a blaze of glory, hopefully taking down a bastard or two in the process. With Finn in my life, I felt differently. I wanted to wake up with him in the morning and see him roll on top of me with a smile. I wanted to take showers with him and eat breakfast with him and fight with him, both real ones and sparring matches. I hunched over and sat on the edge of the bed. For fuck's sake, Zoey. One round with a dick and you're picking out wallpaper samples. No, I couldn't be this girl. Not now, not until Esteban couldn't rip apart a happy ending before it even began. I shifted to push off the bed. An arm caught me around the middle, a knife edge point thrust against my windpipe. I reached down to pull out my knife when a familiar voice whispered in my ear. Don't do it. If you so much as breathe wrong, I'll cut you open from ear to ear and watch as every drop of your blood pours out of your body. I sighed and held my hands up. Not moving, but thanks for the graphic description, you asshole. My, haven't we grown bold with our magic? Esteban whispered in my ear, curling his open thighs around my hips so he sat with his chest pressed into my back. I cringed away from him, but he only edged in closer to my body. I'll make you an offer, Zoey. Give yourself to me now willingly and I won't kill you or your friends. Somehow, I didn't roll my eyeballs out of my head. Oh, let me think. No. Why would you think that would work? He sighed, his breath skating along my ear, and I shuddered. I hoped I could convince you. That you might be receptive given our bond, but I see I was wrong. Bond? What the hell are you talking about? Esteban jerked my head back by my hair, so I stared up into his unhinged eyes. What do you mean? He demanded. Are you playing another game with me? Dude, I don't know what you're sputtering about, but I'd really prefer you take your hand out of my hair before I stab you in the throat. I'd really hate to ruin this new jacket I just got. His hot breath against my cheek unnerved me, as did the clutch of his fingers. He touched me like he owned me, and I wanted his hands off my skin so badly I considered the risk of his blade on my throat. Instead, knowing I would never hear the end of it from the captain or Finn if I didn't call for help when I actually needed it, I tugged down the bond with Finn, opening myself up to him, hoping I did whatever I needed so he could see my predicament. Ah, Esteban whispered. He's coming. Good. I'd like a word with your boyfriend too. We have much to discuss. But while we wait for his heroic arrival, tell me, where is my watch? I'd left it in Finn's room, intending to find a safe for it. For some reason, it reacted to me. I knew if I called it to my hand, it would appear. The same way I'd made it disappear in the jewelry store. For now, I would leave it where it was. I doubted Esteban intended to search every room in the palace to find it. Not when he had plenty of people to threaten into helping him. I'm sure it's around here somewhere, I said, watching the door, feeling Finn coming closer and closer to me. Esteban shifted the knife against my throat, not cutting but dragging the point along my skin. Not up to your usual standards of wit, my dear. Am I not interesting enough to rile your keen mind? Finn and the captain raced through the door at the same time. They skidded to a halt and stared slack-jawed at the pair of us. If it weren't for the knife, our position could definitely be described as intimate. Let her go, Finn said. Esteban and Finn locked eyes over my shoulder, and Esteban vibrated with tension behind me. You stole something from me. Finn dragged his gaze to mine for a heartbeat and then back to Esteban. No, you forfeited that the moment you allowed your power to be corrupted. I saved it the only way I could think of. I tried to follow the conversation, since obviously they weren't talking about the pocket watch. The captain edged around Finn to stand on a diagonal with Esteban. For the first time since he'd grabbed me, something like fear took hold, turning my stomach in knots. Unable to take it anymore, I interrupted. "What's going on?" Esteban answered first. "Tell her, Finn." Finn met my eyes now, his gaze softening as we stared at each other. The knife he's holding is a mage blade. A famous one. It can deliver an unhealable wound. I seized in Esteban's arms and he clutched me tighter against his solid chest. I wouldn't make too many movements. Not while my control is a little shaky. Finn took a step forward. "What do you want?" "Take it and go." Not the thing to say, as I knew exactly what Esteban wanted right now, me. Esteban nuzzled the side of my face with his own. His breath smelled of mint and tobacco. I would have felt better if he wasn't so pretty, so appealing to the senses. Not that he drew me in, but he would be many a female's downfall because of his rakish good looks. Finn realized his mistake as he watched us. A slow roll of horror edged through the bond between us. "You can have anything else. Take it and go. Leave Zoey out of this." "But she's been in this since the very beginning," Esteban yelled, and my ear rang. It was becoming clear to me Esteban had gone off the deep end. Worse had to be the fact that I couldn't figure out why. "I'll give you the watch if you just leave us alone," I said, my voice coming out breathy and more scared than I wished it did. He nuzzled me again, trailing his lips down my cheek. "Oh love, this was never really about the watch. It doesn't matter because when I walk out of here, I'll be taking you both with me." I locked eyes with Finn, but he appeared frozen, staring at us. I shifted my focus to the captain, who had zero qualms about staring between us all in disgust and horror. I didn't think I could wiggle out of his grasp before he slit my throat with his knife. However, I'd learned my lesson, and I refused to be the reason either of my two friends died. I needed another tactic. I shifted in Esteban's grip but toward him, arching my back into him. He groaned in my ear, and I had to keep the bile from rising in my throat. I kept my voice soft and neutral. "Esteban, there is no way I'm walking out of here with you. I won't go voluntarily, and these men won't allow you to take me. So, let's try to reach a compromise so no one has to die today." He tipped the knife down to trail between my breasts, right over my heart. Any tiny shift in movement, and he could plunge the blade into my chest and end me in a second. I shivered in fear and I hated him for it even more. "Oh, I think they will make a deal if it means keeping you alive," he told me, his gaze eating up my expression and every twitch of emotion I displayed to him. "Is there anything else you want? I'm sure this place is full of treasures a man like you could appreciate." He scoffed, and I realized I'd said the wrong thing. "You know nothing about this house or this family," he said. "Who are you to offer up such wealth to save your own skin?" He vibrated with anger, the edge of his knife forgotten as he snarled in my face. I tried to pull away just enough so he wouldn't nick me with the blade, but he'd lost all reason. As I inched my hand down to my thigh sheath, the captain rushed Esteban from his other side. Esteban slashed the knife out and slit the captain's throat in one long thin stroke. Finn's sorrow hit me first like a solid blow to the sternum. I gasped and scrambled out of Esteban's arms to rush to the captain's side. Using my magic, any and all sources I could find, I tried to throw it into him, heal him. Nothing happened. The wound stayed an open gash as he stared up at me. All I could do was hold his hand despite the shouting from behind me. He met my eyes and tugged me toward his face. I leaned in and he whispered, "It's the bond. You deserve the truth." Blood burbled out of his mouth and down the sides of his face. I stared in horror as the life left his eyes. A wave of anger swamped me. It wasn't Finn's but my own. It brought my magic to the surface in a smooth wave of power, bringing both my Phi magic and my mage magic online together. I couldn't think about losing the captain right now, nor about how our friendship was snatched from me before we'd even had time to grow into it. Right now, my fingers itched to feel Esteban's blood coating them. My knives sang through me, urging me on. I dragged the blades from my thighs and spun to face Esteban. He and Finn grappled on the bed, and I froze in horror as Esteban arched the knife overhead to plunge it into Finn's back. Chapter 17. I was numb as the world narrowed to this one single moment. Esteban held the knife high, ready to plunge it into Finn. Finn swiped his forearm up in time to intercept the hit and knock the knife to the floor. I scrambled after the knife, launching myself across the polished hardwood, but I couldn't find it. My gaze caught on my blood-stained fingers and I couldn't look away. The captain's blood. Harlan, I reminded myself of his actual name. Harlan was dead and he'd died to save my life. The echo of Finn's sadness and the grief battering him had imprinted into our bond when the captain fell. It was just sitting there, doubling between us as we both internally grappled with his loss. I would never hear him chide me about my fighting stances again. Nor would I ever get to poke fun at him for being uptight with a stick up his ass. It took several seconds to realize tears poured down my face so hard I couldn't breathe through my nose anymore. I tore my gaze away from my bloody hands and patted the hardwood to find the knife. Whatever cloaked it when it hit the ground worked too well. I should stand up and survey the area from above. A grunt and a fist meeting flesh forced me to look back at Esteban and Finn, who had fallen over the other side of the bed and now faced off against each other across the room. Unbidden, my gaze rushed to the captain's still form again. No amount of magic could bring back the dead, but I would give it all up if it were possible. I stood and resumed my search. If I found the knife, I would use it on Esteban and end his miserable existence for good. The thought spurred me to work faster, but another grunt turned my focus to the fight again. A deep gash down one of Finn's cheeks leaked blood over his lips and his chin. He didn't seem to care as he took another lunge toward Esteban. When my hand brushed a sharp edge, I froze. Carefully, I used my fingers to find the curves of the knife until I could safely grab the hilt. Power roared through me. Oh, this wasn't just a regular knife. I slid over the bed, right behind Esteban, and touched the tip of the blade to his neck, under his ear where I could plunge it easily. Stop moving. He stilled, as did Finn on the other side of him. I didn't care that tears still poured down my face. A wave of sadness brushed my senses, but I glared at Finn to tell him to knock it off while I focused on Esteban. Given my height, I spoke to his shoulder, but I was sure the pointy metal in my hand lent some weight to my voice. You killed my friend and you've taken so much from me. My heart pounded in my chest. A voice in my head demanded I get revenge for the captain, for Finn, for myself. I shook my head. You're not even sorry you killed people and destroyed lives, says the woman holding a knife on me. Wow. The balls on this guy. The same knife you were holding on me 5 minutes ago. The one you just used to cut my friend's throat. You have no high ground to stand on here. Especially with a knife that blocks healing. Really? He kept his eyes locked on Finn, ready to resume their battle as if I never interrupted, as if I was insignificant in the fight between them. One more glance at the captain's body decided me. I pressed the tip of the knife into Esteban's neck, but nothing happened. I pressed harder, but the blade still didn't puncture his skin. I removed the knife, and he snatched it from my grasp before I could blink. You already know a mage's blood-song weapon can't be turned against them. His voice was low, angry, all the soft need he had earlier displayed for me erased. What game was he playing? I flipped one of my black steel knives out of its sheath into my waiting palm. That knife might not hurt you, but this one has been calling for your blood all day. He blocked my next strike with his knife, but I pressed in closer. I layered my mage magic along the edge of the knife and into my hands, using it to strengthen me enough for a chance against him. In the confines of the small space between the bed and the wall, we couldn't exactly have an all-out fight. I swept my knife out again, which he blocked. I yanked my second knife free and swung both knives at him, forcing him to block with his own knife in one hand and his forearm to guard against the other. I took great joy in the red lines seeping into the sleeve of his white dress shirt. He took one look at the blood and shoved me so hard into the wall all the air got knocked from my lungs. While I was down, he hopped over the top of the bed to take up a position in the main open space of the room. His feet were close to Harlan's body and a fresh wave of anger surged through me. Get the hell away from him, I said, already climbing over the bed for another attack. Finn reached him first and delivered a solid punch right across Esteban's jaw. Esteban stumbled backward, narrowly missing Harlan and teetering into the wall near the fireplace. I darted across the room toward them. They exchanged blows, ducking and swinging at each other. I hovered on the edge of the fight, waiting for my chance to drive my black steel into Esteban's gut. With a sharp kick to the midsection, Finn pushed him back into the wall. Esteban struck out with the knife, but Finn dodged. We needed to get Esteban's ruthless weapon back out of play before Finn or I took a fatal hit. Esteban cut across the room as if he were making a run for the door. I blocked his path. Oh, what's the rush? You came into my room and started this whole mess. You don't get to leave early just because no one wants to dance with you. I came for you, woman. That is all. It's clear I'll have to find you when you are alone and take you then. His words were violent but his tone lascivious. Vomit. Finn snuck up behind him. Esteban spun away in time to miss both Finn's fist and my knife strike. Power zinged along my nerves and I resisted the urge to use it. Instead, I gathered it up, hoping to hold it until I needed it. Then it hit me. Finn was fighting Esteban with his fists, but he hadn't busted out his magic once yet. And his way worked more reliably than mine did. What was he playing at? I shoved my magic into the fray, trying to freeze Esteban in his tracks, allowing Finn to get a hold of him. My magic washed over him and he shot me a smirk as he parried with Finn. After my last attack, he'd put up some kind of shield to protect himself. It was the only logical explanation, and something I should have been doing for myself. But why hadn't the captain or Finn done that? I waited for Esteban and Finn to swing back around to me. My body hummed with the need to sink into a fight and lose myself. Let all this rage and anger burn off in a victory. I tried to step forward but found myself locked in place. A glance from Finn answered the question before I even asked it. The bastard had used his magic to keep me out of the way. Not in my head like he did last time, but by confining me into a small square of the floor. I fought against him, shoving at his magic with my own, all the while blasting him with my anger over the choices he made for me. He didn't get to choose his own revenge over mine. I grabbed both Fi and Mage magic to shove at his cage. Why would he do this to me again? We'd connected on a whole new level, and this fresh betrayal cracked something open, something toxic and hateful in my chest. We wouldn't be able to come back from this. A shimmer of regret filtered down the bond, but I was too angry to do little more than slap it away. Esteban lunged at Finn and caught him across the arm with the knife. The wound welled up, dripping blood onto the hardwood. Why the fuck aren't you shielding yourself? I called out to him. Despite my cage, I didn't want him to die. Esteban answered in a sing-song voice. Because he's draining himself, shielding you, little one. The news set me back. I gaped at Finn, and focused my magic to view the shimmer in the air. How intricately Finn had woven his magic to block any attack against me, magical or physical. The effort taxed him, and yet he fought with Esteban single-handedly. My old insecurities reared up. Did he not trust me to handle myself? I'd shown repeatedly since I came back that I would consider my actions before rushing into choices. Maybe I hadn't spent enough time thinking before I gave Finn all of me. Another wave of longing hit me, and I sent back my betrayal. It hit him hard enough to cause him to stumble. Esteban struck, shoving the knife into the side of his body until the hilt met his already blood-soaked shirt. When he pulled it free, he let Finn slip to the floor in a heap. My heart stopped and pain screamed through my soul. No. He wiped his knife on his pants leg to clean it. Having her here while we fought was a good decision. I never considered how distracting she would be for you. I suppose I should be grateful. He crouched by Finn, who swiped out at him. It was a meager effort at best. I could already feel Finn's magic cage weakening around me. When Finn closed his eyes, the world went quiet. The entire room echoed with the intensity of it. Like walking through the silence of a snowstorm, raging yet symphonic at the same time. As the last of his power dripped away, I surged out of the confines of his cage to Finn's side. Propping him on my lap, I held my hands over the wound. If you die right now, I will fucking kill you, Finn. You do not get to avoid the absolutely hideous fight we are going to have when this is all over. You idiot, I can protect myself. Esteban hovered over us. Time to go, little one. You're coming with me. His magic wasn't as subtle as Finn's. Esteban's power grated over my skin, demanding and consuming in its wake. I shook it off, blocking what I could with my interwoven powers. Finn, stay with me. Esteban pressed harder into me and something snapped inside me. The watch I'd stolen from him appeared in my hand and I flipped it open. Before Esteban could react, I focused enough to freeze the world around us. 60 seconds. Esteban froze mid-step, heading toward me. As long as Finn stayed frozen, maybe he wouldn't bleed out on me. Little one, Esteban called, though his mouth didn't move. It sounded eerie through the power of the watch. 55 seconds. It hadn't been a minute yet, but his hand twitched, as if he were shaking off the effects. Despite being frozen, he called out to me through the magic. Zoey, little Zoey. We're going home, and I promise I'll treat you way better than Finn ever could. Fuck you, I whispered. 50 seconds. I had mere moments left to figure it out and save Finn's life. Losing him wasn't an option. While I wanted to bash his head into a brick wall for his stupidity, if he left me, I didn't think I would survive it. A pulse along the bond caught my attention, and I left Esteban's frozen form to inspect Finn. What are you trying to tell me? Another pulse, but it felt too faint to catch the emotion he tried to impart with his waning power. Damn it, Finn, I said, leaning forward to press my hand onto his chest. Talk to me. I know you can do it. Zoey, Esteban called louder now. 40 seconds. The second hand ticked, each tick feeling like a strike to my frayed nerves. One final pulse shimmered down the bond, and then it went silent. This time I caught more than a feeling. This time I caught the words I never got the chance to hear him say. I love you. 30 seconds. Chapter 18. I had 30 seconds to make my choice. Did I try to find a weapon that could kill Esteban here and now and maybe succeed, which would in turn leave Finn to die in the time it took? Or did I grab Finn and haul ass out of this house to find help for him? My body screamed at me to take my vengeance. My newly opened mind told me to think about things. I eyed Finn and plucked at our quiet bond. He wasn't supposed to fall in love with me. If I'd fallen for him, that was one thing. I could shove it away, pretend it didn't exist. His damn honor wouldn't allow him to do the same. 25 seconds. After we'd slept together, we'd agreed, if given the choice, taking out Esteban had to be the priority. But Harlan's blood already stained my hands. Finn's added another layer to the sticky coating when I tried to staunch his wounds. I didn't have it in me to watch another friend die today, especially not Finn, not when there were so many things I needed to say to him. 20 seconds. I hugged Finn tight to me and pressed a kiss to his head. The second on the watch ticked, reminding me I had to make my choice and do it fast. Little Zoey, Esteban said, his voice growling louder. I'm so proud you figured out my little secret. Our children will be blessed with magic and the wit to back it up. This pleases me. Finn twitched his foot, brushing my leg. If there was even a chance to save him, then there really was no choice after all. 15 seconds. I used my magic and the fireman's carry I'd practiced until my knees gave out in bounty hunter training, to scoop Finn over my shoulder and carry him across the room. Esteban's gaze followed me out the door. The usual black SUV sat in the driveway, and I hobbled for it as fast as I could go. Time's up. A guard sprinted toward me, shock etched on his features. Give me the damn keys, I growled at him. He moved to take Finn, but I shoved him back with a blast of air. No. After one of you betrayed us, I don't trust any of you. Give me the keys. The Black Mage is in there, and your men should get away while you can. With a salute, he moved toward the house. I tucked Finn into the passenger side. It hurt to leave the captain's body there, but I couldn't waste the time, not with Esteban already breaking free of the enchantment. I used the watch again. 60 seconds. It seemed to take more out of me. If I had to use it all the way to my destination to keep Finn with me, so be it. Despite the blood, his pulse still fluttered under my fingers as I gripped his wrist across the console. I would drive one-handed to keep monitoring him. You're such an idiot, Zoey, I said. I eyed Finn across from me, his face pale. You're an idiot too. How could you let yourself fall in love with me? You know I'm about as unreliable as can be when it comes to emotions, and yet you still went and did it. At this point, I was berating both of us because it made me feel better. Was it just this morning that I'd woken up so replete and happy? Thinking that maybe just once for me, life wouldn't knee me in the ladyballs and try to shove me off a cliff. I should have learned my lesson on that one. A sputter and cough beside me made me jerk the wheel. My heart pounding and adrenaline pumping through me kept us on the road. Finn cracked his eyes open and sighed heavily. What happened? Well, you dope, you took a stab from a knife that is supposed to be unhealable. So good job there. I'm taking you to get help. Where? I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary, but refrained from telling him where we were headed. Don't worry about it. Lay back and rest. Do you know if we can do anything to stop the bleeding? He grunted and shifted in the seat. The tingle of magic washed over my skin and he sagged back. I slowed the car, reached across and fumbled with the controls to lay his seat back to make him more comfortable. What did you do? I thought you couldn't heal it. He wheezed and then more magic whispered in the air. His voice came out stronger the second time. I used my magic to cycle my blood. As it comes out, it will go back in. It's not a permanent solution, but it will hold for a little while. It wasn't an option when he faded and pain arched down the bond between us. He didn't need to continue for me to guess he meant the captain. He died too fast for any sort of loophole magic to save him. I kept my gaze on the road, still leaving my fingers of one hand on his wrist to monitor his pulse. Despite wanting to hear his voice, I knew he should remain quiet. Keep his strength up. The words he hadn't said, but I'd felt choked the air between us. It wasn't the time to drag them out and fight about it, but I couldn't leave them there, not when I knew he could hear me. You're not in love with me, I told him. He didn't answer, and I glanced over to make sure he was still awake. His eyes were open as he stared out the windshield. You might think you are because of this bond or whatever between us, but when you get rid of it and the amazing sex is gone, you'll realize I'm an asshole and no one should have to put up with this mess. Again he remained silent. I tried to force some cheer into my tone. We'll get you fixed up, and then you can go chase some high-born Phi woman. I'm sure you two will make beautiful Phi children. The thought made me physically ill. I caught his voice down the bond this time. His actual deep, sexy, exasperated voice. You're so full of shit. Stop lying to yourself and to me and drive the damn car. His voice in my head made me glance at him. Horror likely stamped across my features. What the fuck? He shrugged and in my mind spoke again. It's part of the bond. Over time it changes, especially if both parties have powerful feelings. Is this how you and the captain used to speak when you didn't want me to hear what you were talking about? He nodded and then coughed, leaning his head against the passenger side window. The cold from the glass seemed to comfort him. Especially if both parties have powerful feelings. Of course I knew deep down how I felt about him, but I couldn't very well walk around in denial if my own magic kept calling me out on my shit. A soft, almost hysterical laugh escaped me. Dusk gathered outside, shooting diffused light along the trees and roads. In normal circumstances it would be pretty, but not when the person I cared about bled out in the passenger seat. I flicked on the headlights and kept going. When I'd first climbed in the car, I didn't know what to do, where to take him to get help. But as I drove, my flight plan solidified and my mind supplied only one choice. Not that any of us were going to enjoy it when we got there. Finn shifted in his seat and a shudder rolled through him. I remembered when I was injured how cold I felt the entire time. My teeth had chattered with it. I shrugged out of my jacket with one hand on the wheel and draped it over his shoulder. He didn't hesitate to snuggle into it, and the action shot a bolt of something straight into my heart. Damn it, when had I gotten so soft? I dragged my gaze from Finn, who still stared out the window, and focused on the road. It would take another hour to get to our destination. Are you going to tell me where we are going? Finn asked in my mind. I kept my feelings of disgust at having someone in my head shoved down. It wasn't his fault, it wasn't like he did this on purpose. I can't tell you where we are going. I'm magically bound not to. He threw me a sharp look over his shoulder. What the hell kind of place magically binds its visitors so they can't reveal its location? I kept my eyes on the road and my mind carefully blank. If he knew, he would be clawing his way out of the car right now. This time out loud he said, I get the sense that I'm not going to like this. If I had another choice, I'd have taken it. But no, you won't like it. I won't like it. The person who owns the place we are headed will hate it most of all. But if anyone can save your life, then it'll be him. Him? You're not taking me to Esteban's house so he can finish the job, are you? That earned him a glare. Since he is currently at your house, likely ransacking the place or chasing us down, no, I'm not. If I thought I could convince him to share a cure to fix you, I might have considered it. But I wouldn't trust him to hold up his end of a deal with me, no matter what I offered him. I checked the clock, and my stomach let out a loud rumble. Perfect timing, as usual, for my body to demand its needs met. Finn huffed out a chuckle, but it ended in a cough. There are protein bars in the console if you're hungry. Since we hadn't been ambushed yet on the road, I figured Esteban had given up chasing us for now. My mind drifted to what the captain had told me as he lay dying. Something about the bond. It was important enough to make those his last words, so I couldn't brush it off. Not from him. I also feared telling Finn about them, as he might not tell me the truth. Otherwise, why would the captain only whisper it to me? I shoved the words down with the rest of my secrets and prayed they stayed there until I could unearth them at a better time. How much farther? Finn asked. I jumped guilty and glanced out the window. Probably 20 more minutes. Are you hungry? Thirsty? Can I do anything to make you more comfortable? He snorted, and I couldn't help but smile. It seemed I only worried about others' comforts when they were mortally wounded. I decided to poke at this thing between Finn and me. Figure out why it had suddenly changed now. Why can I hear your thoughts? Can you hear mine? It took him a long time to answer. I can hear yours, but only whispers. Words or feelings, at least for now. You're not pushing them into my head like I am yours. I let out a breath I'd been holding and nodded. If he couldn't just see inside my head and pick apart my thoughts, then I felt better about this whole mind-reading business. It wasn't as if my brain contained nuclear codes or the back way into Fort Knox. I just didn't want someone in my head, someone who could use my thoughts and feelings against me. Emotions had always felt like ammunition to me. If I kept them locked up, I didn't have to worry about anyone exploding them like grenades in my face or worse, in my heart. Finn touched my arm. You don't like that my voice is inside your head, do you? I leveled him an incredulous glare and then turned back to the road. What in our stunningly long acquaintance told you I enjoyed people in my head? In fact, I believe I've had several meltdowns because someone infiltrated my mind without my permission. But if it's not something you can help, then I can't do anything about it right now. Besides, we need to make sure your organs aren't going to slide out of your body into your lap first. He grimaced. Thanks for that. Call it payback. If you're going to be in my mind, you might see or hear things you don't want to. I've been on both sides of the mind control game. I can appreciate discretion, and I would never throw something in your face that you thought privately to yourself. It surprised me to hear someone had tried to control Finn's mind. That there was someone out there powerful enough to pull it off. I also took his promise, but knew he couldn't possibly keep it. In the heat of an argument during a fight, when people were at their weakest, they would use anything against each other. Anything to strike a blow. Anything to win. I'd seen it more times than I could count. I turned the car down a long winding road that led into the trees. I smell a large body of water, Finn said, his voice weak. Instead of answering, I pressed on the gas harder, sliding from the asphalt as the road turned to a stone driveway. There wasn't a gate, which I always found hilarious, but he'd always said if someone really wanted in, then a gate wouldn't stop them. I pulled up outside a large cottage that sat so close to a lake that sand made up part of the front yard. Quickly, I flicked off the headlights, skirted the vehicle, and helped Finn out from his seat. We made it to the door as it opened. Everything in me deflated, and the security I'd felt driving here home for the first time in years washed away under the man's angry look. Suddenly I was 16 again, sneaking back in after a night with my friends. His eyes held the same angry disappointment. I shoved it all away, because I couldn't take no for an answer. Hey Chief. You going to let us in? I'd hate for Finn to bleed out on your welcome mat. Chapter 19. The chief stood in the doorway, arms crossed, glaring down at me, not even acknowledging Finn's presence. He looked the same, still built like a brick building even at 60. His face and head were cleanly shaven even this late at night. The lights inside the house played across the hollows and lines in his face, especially the long scar that bisected the entire right side. He wore a black t-shirt, black cargo pants, and a soft pair of bunny house slippers I'd given him for Christmas a few years ago. He raised a gray eyebrow, daring me to comment on them. I couldn't hold up Finn's weight much longer. Everything in me had been stretched almost to the breaking point, so I met his steely gaze and said, "Please." I don't know if it was the word, or if he'd already given in the moment he saw me, but he stepped closer to the threshold. What's wrong with him? I need exact details. We were fighting the Black Mage at Finn's mansion, and he got stabbed with a knife that apparently makes an unhealable cut. The chief stared me down, waiting for me to add more to the story. Then how is he still alive, since I know this man lives a solid couple of hours from here? I gestured at the wound and the red aura around it. He did something with his magic to recycle the blood back into his body so he doesn't bleed out, but I think it's a temporary solution. He's getting weaker by the second. The chief nodded at us and looked at Finn directly. Once you step across my doorway, magic won't work here. So whatever you did and whatever that knife did will shut down. It means you're going to start bleeding hard and fast. I can stabilize you, but it will hurt like a bitch and you'll have a wicked scar. My mouth dropped open. He had wards on his doors? Since when? And why? I knew the chief hated magic, but even for him it seemed a bit extreme. Finn spoke in my head. Tell him to do whatever he needs to do. The chief stepped back from the door. Wait here while I gather everything we need. I'll have to work fast once you cross the threshold. I stared at the doorway. Would I have known about my magic sooner, if I hadn't lived here until I turned 20 and got my own place? Doesn't matter now. When the chief returned, he gestured to us to come inside. Finn stumbled in my hold, and the chief came around to help lead him to the floor in front of the cabin's fireplace. Warmth seeped from it, and I resisted the urge to stay there and ease some of the chill in my bones. We laid Finn down on a plastic-lined sheet. Good thinking on the chief's part. Blood poured out of Finn's wound while the chief cut off his shirt and rolled him on his side to get a better look. I don't know if they hit any major organs, so I can apply this powder, but if he's bleeding internally after that, well, you should say your goodbyes. His tone said he preferred option 2. He held a packet of brown grainy powder that almost looked like dirt. Hold him down. This is going to hurt. I braced myself and dug my hands into Finn's shoulder and hip to try and keep him steady, but I worried more if the pain would blast through the bond or not. The chief poured the powder over the wound. Finn let out a sharp hiss and jerked once in my hold. None of the pain he must be feeling reached me. The anti-magic of the chief's house had nulled the bond then. If I wasn't so worried about Finn's head lolling to the side, I would have found it interesting. While the chief packed his wound, I crawled up the plastic and patted Finn's face. He didn't move, but his pulse beat strong in his neck. That had to be a good sign. I met the chief's hard gaze over Finn's shoulder and he gave me a nod. Once the wound had sealed, we worked together to strip his bloody clothes, wash his wounds, and lay him in the guest bedroom bed, which used to be my room. Afterwards, I cleaned myself up and put on some old pajama bottoms and a t-shirt I'd left here for any time I stayed the night. Something I never did. Clean and so very tired, I dropped myself onto a stool at the chief's countertop. He had funnels, baking products, and flour, all arranged on the countertop like little soldiers. What are you doing? I asked, lifting a jar of cream-colored sludge. He grabbed it back and placed it in the neat little row again. I'm making sourdough bread. Why don't you tell me the full story of what has been going on while I work? A protest formed in my head, but then I brushed it away. He deserved the truth. And if there was anyone in the world I trusted, it was the chief. Well, you know we've been hunting the Black Mage. His actual name, I believe, is Esteban. I met him the first week after I left the office. Of course, we failed to take him down because neither Finn nor I trusted each other. Afterward, I left, went home, and decided to continue on my own. The chief grunted as he measured things and tossed them in a large clear glass bowl. Sounds about right. I ignored that little comment and continued. Finn begged me to come back and help him again. I didn't want to at first, but he convinced me. We fought Esteban again. This time we got our asses handed to us, and 2 of our team almost died. Grief swamped through me and tears prickled at the corner of my eyes. I pressed on, since the story wouldn't get any easier as I spoke. Things were good, we were making a solid plan. One where we'd actually thought things through. And they were teaching me about my magic. Then Esteban attacked at Finn's home, going on the offensive, I guess. He killed one of our friends and injured Finn. The chief turned his mixing bowl out onto the granite countertop. What made you come here? You know how I feel about magic. I shook my head. I don't know. It was more like I didn't decide at all. I just started driving and I needed to come home. It was the first time I'd called this little cabin home. The chief stilled in forming a ball of dough with his scarred hands dusted in flour. I couldn't meet his gaze, so I focused on the granite pattern in the countertop instead. I guess I don't know what to do now, and it felt safest to be here with that uncertainty. Esteban no doubt knows where I live. But what I haven't figured out was when things went from us hunting him to him hunting me. For some reason, he's after me, and thinks he can drag me off to his compound to have his evil mage babies. The chief's answering grunt of disgust matched my own feelings. I would die first, and I hoped Finn knew that. He might have to kill me if things went sideways, and it looked like Esteban might get a hold of me. I watched the chief knead the doughs, rolling it over and over and back and forth on the countertop. When did you start making bread? He sighed, as if he'd been waiting for me to ask him. Since Hawk threatened to make me see a doctor if I didn't do something. He suggested meditation. This is the neutral ground I settled on. I cocked my head. Is it restful? He stepped back and waved at the dough. Wash your hands and you can find out for yourself. The chief and I didn't really have moments. There were a few memories of my training I cherished between us, but nothing like this, so I feared rebuffing him. I shoved out of the stool, scrubbed my hands in the sink, and stepped up to the counter. What do I do? He gestured at the bag of flour. Dust your hands with flour first. Then push your wrist into the dough and shove up, almost like you're shoving the heel of your hand into someone's nose. I laughed and did exactly like he instructed. The dough stretched around my hand to the sides, as well as upward toward the edge of the countertop. Now scoop it down again and repeat, he said, watching over my shoulder. He smelled like yeast and butter. Not scents I usually associated with him, but I wasn't complaining. Do I get to eat this when I'm done? How do you know when to stop kneading it? He shrugged. I just do it until it's kind of springy and shiny. Also, once it stops sticking to my hands. I kneaded the dough a few more times and then stepped back. I'm too tired to do this, but I don't mind watching. When I resumed my seat on the stool, he picked up where he left off. So that Phi in there, do you know anything about him? Do you? I countered. He gave me the same quelling look he had so many times in my youth. Of course. From the moment I saw you with him that day in the office, I made it my mission to learn whatever I could. He has a long history and a lot of secrets, Zoey. I waved at myself. Look who you're talking to. I may be young, but somehow I have the same. It's not the same. You don't know what kind of man that is. I'd hoped you'd never find out about his kind, that whole world. But I guess it was inevitable. You mean when I discovered my own magic? I pressed. Are you ashamed of me now? He jerked up his head and scowled. I could never be ashamed of you, Zoey. Not now, not ever. You may not be my blood, but you're my daughter. I know what it is I was given all those years ago. And despite how you feel for me, I've always been grateful for it. I swallowed the thick lump that formed in my throat. You're not disappointed in me, then? The chief came around the counter and pulled me into a flour-coated hug. I breathed in the scent of him and let him hold me. Let him take some of the pain and uncertainty away. I'm sure we'll be disappointed in each other many times over the years, he said. That's temporary. It's how we get around the realization that we're all human and move forward that keeps us together. I sniffed, absolutely not crying, and hugged him tighter. Thank you. And thank you for helping us tonight. I couldn't watch him die. Not after. He patted the mess of my hair and released me to finish his work on the bread. Once he stuffed the dough into a bowl and lay a warm rag over the top, I eyed him. What now? He crossed the kitchen to wash his hands. That has to rise for an hour, and we're going to wake up your friend. I have a few questions of my own. We shuffled back to the guest room, but Finn already sat on the edge of the bed in nothing but his black boxer briefs. Heat washed into my face, and I carefully kept my eyes off his body. The chief grabbed a wooden chair from the other side of the bed and placed it in front of Finn. Now, son, it's time to get the truth out. Finn glanced my way and visibly sagged, his hands cradling his face. What do you want to know? How about we start with this bond I felt between the two of you when you stood on my doorstep? A bond I know shouldn't exist. I watched the pair of them and then stepped forward, my heart pounding out of my chest. What a minute. Do you two know each other? Finn met my eyes first, guilt written in every line of his face. The chief looked up at me with the same steadfast expression he always gave me. We do. I met him years ago, on the day you and I met for the very first time. The day your parents died. The end. Zoey and Finn's adventure continues in Book 4 Magic Hunter here.